Wrath of Angels. Chapter 7. Scene 1. The Gathering. Aboard the Wrath of Angels. Above the shrine world Arvenor. 1 year and 8 months after extraction from Caridon. Month 3, year 263. The 41st millennium. The hangar was a cathedral with its doors torn open to the stars. Candles hung in cages from cargo gantries, each flame a stubborn star. Beneath them the oathbound of the sanctum came walking, 4 in a line, bearing a bier of black iron. Zephynis lay upon it in pieces of himself, helm cracked like a split bell, chestplate peeled where a traitor's blade found the seam, gauntlets folded like a prayer too late. The pieces were wrapped in scripture and iron wire. His transhuman mass made the bier sag. His absence made all the air sag with it. Mortals filled the mezzanines, pressed behind railings, serfs with ash stitched into their cuffs, voidsmen in oil-black coats, a choir of augmetic throats hissing a chord so low the deck carried it. They had not been ordered to assemble. The Wrath herself had called them, lumen by lumen, pressure door by pressure door, a soft green pulse along corridors and lift shafts, as if the ship were gathering her blood to the heart. Melchizedek went before the bier. His Crozius, hammer-headed and winged, rested across his palms like a judge's book. When he raised it, the caged candles steadied. Bronze trims along his pauldron were warped where warp fire had licked them. Parchment strips clung to his armor like ivy, each line of script a nail in the flesh of memory. He looked only at Zephynis. "Name of the fallen," he said, and the choir cut off. Brother Zephynis of the oathbound of the sanctum called the trumpet of wrath. He stood when others bent. He shouted when others swallowed. He dies as all oathsmen should, loud and facing the enemy. Ramiel set his corner of the bier down with a care that made the rivets creak. Lutharion and Abriath followed. Dominiel, grim Dominiel, the flail-bearer, touched his fist to the sundered helm once, as if confirming that silence had truly taken voice. The intercessors of the Emerald Vow stood as a wall behind them, banners heavy with wax and smoke. Raven-winged scouts of the Silent Hunt formed a thin black line. Commander Seraphiel stood apart on a servo dais that hummed with restrained temper. The halo of his command crest framed a skull that was still. His right gauntlet was the old masterwork of bone-white adamantium, sutured and inscribed, a reliquary that could close upon anything he named an ending. "The Hall of Bones is open," he said, unhurried iron. A seam in the hangar's far wall unzipped. Behind it lay stacked names, carved so tight the eye made them into music. Mortals whispered that the hall rearranged itself sometimes, names drifting to stand beside those they should. The ship remembered order better than men. Dominiel took a chisel. Melchizedek said the words by which a name is hammered into eternity. It was not a prayer. It was a record. Each strike made dust. The motes hung in the candlelight like astonished souls. When the cut was finished, the chaplain rested his Crozius against the raw letters. "Wrath remembers," he said. "We do not forgive, we do not explain, we record." His hooded gaze climbed to the living. "A vacuum is made by death. It is our way to fill it." The ship agreed in iron. A groan passed along the bulkheads, like a keel under pressure. Lysa, a dockhand who had scrubbed blood from the hangar after the last return, crossed herself with oil-stained fingers and felt silly doing it where angels could see. On a higher gallery, a boy in a patched wool coat stood on tiptoe and clutched the rail until his knuckles went bloodless. He did not yet have a name for what he wanted. He only knew the air tasted of forever. "Make ready," Melchizedek said. Sirens rolled like thunder, bay doors unshuttered with the slow elegance of ritual. Thunderhawks crouched in cradles, runes stepped from standby amber to hungry green. On the toss of Seraphil's gauntlet, clamps released. The oathbound bore the bier inward. The ship seemed to carry the dead upon her own back. The procession split. One line for the hall, one line for the sky. The shrine world below had a sky like painted glass. Storm bands moved in stately circuits. When the thunderhawks cut through, they tore long rents like scars. The capital lay where a river looped wide enough for a city to sit in its lap, all cupolas and needle towers and processional squares. Bells had been ringing since the first silhouette appeared in the high blue. Bells were still ringing when the first shadow crossed the square of the seven virtues. By tradition, the people met the angels there. Families came with their youths polished, as for a second birth, hair oiled and braided, faces scrubbed to a shine, collars stiff, wrists bound with red thread. No law demanded the pageant. The law did not need to. Some came eager, some came obedient. Many came with that complex cocktail that only faith can distill. They all came. A city does not fail a ritual and remain itself. The thunderhawks descended on their own smoke. Landing gears punched flagstones with a dull report the heart mistook for an extra beat. Ramps ground down and became bridges between heavens and men. The angels walked out. At first they were geometry, angles, mass, a rhythm of steps that did not heed the crowd. Then they were statues that moved. Then they were men, impossibly large, armor painted in a green that ate light and a bone that returned it like winter sun off old snow. Helmets were skulls, or hoods, or both at once. People made a sound without knowing what it meant. At the head came Melchizedek and Seraphil, flanked by two Deathwing veterans whose shields were broad iron pages. Melchizedek's hood put his eyes in shadow. His vox grill turned his voice into what it already was, larger than a throat can make. He did not shout. He spoke, and every ear learned obedience. "People of Valan Tertius," he said. Whether the name was precisely correct did not matter. "We honor your piety and your tithe. The First Legion remembers your vows." He pointed his crozius toward the sky, where the wrath hung like judgment. "We choose the brave. From those we choose, some will live as angels. Some will not live. This is not cruelty. This is arithmetic." An intake of breath passed across the square like wind. A bell faltered, convinced. Seraphil made a small gesture. Honor guard took stations. Robed serfs unfolded racks that were not banners. Iron frames hung with shackles polished to an obscene shine. The priesthood advanced under a canopy of their finest cope, traced circles in dust, and let old words smoke from their mouths. They were not praying for mercy. They were setting the table. "Bring them," Melchizedek said. Families began to move in the pattern that fear makes. The forward-leaning bravado of those who believe that being first eases the blade. The laggard strangling of those who trust in disappearance. A girl of 15, taller than her mother, with her father's hard jaw, marched ahead and did not look back, because to look back would disprove a thing she had not yet said aloud. A boy of 13 had to be dragged by an uncle because his legs had become allegory. Lead, stone, plea. An old man tried to substitute himself for his grandson and discovered that bargains spoken to angels are confessions, not contracts. Melchizedek walked the line without touching anyone. When he stopped before a youth, he inclined his head as if listening, though nothing spoke. He watched hands, breath in throats, tension across shoulders. He watched how a gaze landed on his crozius, on the wings, the hammer, the scripture, and whether it landed as an idol or a tool. He passed most by. When he chose, he did not point. He let his gaze rest. The gauntleted brother beside him tapped his target on the shoulder, almost tender, and the serfs came with their polished iron. Lysa had come down surface with the landing crews to feed the Thunderhawks. She had scrubbed bolter muzzles and emptied sluices no one names. When the first shackle closed, something old in her chest wanted to run into the smoke and say no. It was not allowed. It was also unnecessary. The machine moved without her opinion. She was a small gear and proud to be a true one. She steadied a ramp stay as a chosen boy stumbled and then righted himself with dignity, the way a foal pretends it meant to stumble to own the ground it fell on. He caught her eye once. He did not ask for help. He filed her face somewhere as if for later. Seraphiel kept count without counting. Each candidate was an addition to the hole Zephanis had left, and to other holes besides. Every so often he looked up toward the high houses above the square, where faces watched from latticed balconies. He read them as he read auspex: familiarity, suspicion, pride, hatred disguised as piety, piety disguised as hatred. He did not blame them. He had stopped blaming a long time ago and found it improved his aim. Not all the chosen went quietly. One boy slipped when iron touched him. The serfs lifted him by the elbows, and he thrashed until Malkadek turned his head, and the boy fell very still. Not asleep, stilled. A girl spat at the boot of the brother who shackled her. The spittle clung like a jewel until the ash dried it to a crust. The brother did not notice. The girl's mother began to cry and tried to stop. The sound became a series of little yelps, like someone squeezing a toy in a pocket to keep her hands busy. The priesthood did not look up. They had their circles to complete. Their god was hunger, and they fed it with perfection. There were, as always, the ones who wanted it. They looked at the angels the way a starving man looks at a door. The 13-year-old boy, once he had his balance, straightened until his spine remembered it could be a column. He met Malchadek's eyes and did not look away, because no one had ever taught him to. The chaplain's hood made approval unreadable. The gauntleted tap came anyway. When the racks were full, the priests struck their staffs, and the bells changed their tongues. The oathbound, who had remained by the ramps like statues at a tomb gate, came down and formed a wall around the chosen. The crowd gave way as water gives way when something heavy falls through it. The wall moved, the hole closed. The city was the same shape and different in every angle. Malchadek lifted his crozius. That was the last permission anyone needed. The angels turned and mounted the ramps. Seraphiel stood a moment longer, looking at the square where his presence had made the air itself seem stiffer. A watcher in silence, small, hooded, a mannequin from nightmare nursery tales, was suddenly at his elbow as if it had always been there. He did not look down. He inclined his head a millimeter. The thing inclined its hood the same amount and was elsewhere. Agreement had been reached in a dialect no mortal speaks. The Thunderhawks closed their mouths. The noise they made leaving was the noise of sentences ending. It is a long walk from planetfall to the Crucible decks, longer when your ankles are bit by iron and your hands tingle where blood cannot properly arrive. The Wrath had left orbit by the time the Chosen were funneled along the Black March, but the ship still allowed them glimpses of the world they had been extracted from. A sliver of blue in a viewport, a maintenance grate onto a wedge of river and roof, a lumen panel flickering with delayed transmissions of cathedral bells. The gifts were deliberate cruelties. They tasted of doors closing. Lysa walked at the end of the column with 3 other deckhands, shock staves grounded, faces set to the neutral that keeps knives out of your ribs in tight corridors. She watched the backs of the Chosen. The rope of sweat down one boy's spine, the red crescents another made rubbing his wrists against iron, the girl with the hard jaw moving like a metronome. Now and again, the column paused and the mortals steadied a candidate as the ship changed its gait underfoot. Gravity shifting a fraction, pressure doors, sighing confessionals open and shut. They passed under a bulkhead where scripture had been welded so thick it looked like frost. They passed a niche where a robed statue held an empty plate. Once the plate might have contained bread. They passed a viewport where the stars were not stars, but long, pale scratches where the shields worried at light. The air smelled of oil with its skin burned off, and of ceremonial ash ground fine in filters. At a turn where two corridors braided, Melchizedek and Seraphiel met the column again. The chaplain regarded the faces as if they were instruments telling him something he already knew. The commander spoke so quietly, the words were absorbed rather than heard. "You are not chosen because you are good," Seraphiel said. "You are chosen because you can be shaped." His gaze rested for a moment on the girl who had not looked back. "The first shape is silence," they went on. The doors ahead unsealed with the sigh of lungs that had been holding their breath too long, and the crucible of ash breathed them in. This has been Wrath of Angels, Chapter 7, Scene 1, The Gathering. Chapter 7, Scene 2 follows. Wrath of Angels. Chapter 7, Scene 2, Trials of Flesh. Aboard the Wrath of Angels, the Crucible decks, 4 weeks after the gathering. Month 4, year 263, the 41st millennium. The first lesson of the Black March was that the ship had more corridors than mercy. They were unshackled only from the ankles, and only because the floor wished them to run. The floor announced this by tilting 2 degrees, a maritime trick that made knees into lies. Sirens did not wail. A chime sounded, 3 slow notes, as if a bell were being struck underwater, and the doors of the crucible decks opened like the eye of an old predator. "Forward," said a mortal taskmaster, with a vox throat and a saint's medallion welded to it. He tapped a shock stave once on the deck. The crack leapt along the line and woke everyone who hoped for more time in which to be afraid. The corridor swallowed sound. Reclaimer lamps threw hard shadows. Scripture panels broke the light into strips. The chosen went forward with the gait of people moving through a dream, irregular, a little levitational, because the ship was kind enough to cheat their weight and cruel enough to return it without warning. Lisa kept her post at the rear with 2 other deckhands and a servitor whose skull had been polished until it reflected candle flame like a second sun. The first turn in the Black March bore a plaque, "Be stubborn." The second, "Be sharp." The third, "Be stone." Between them the air thinned in a way that made the heart learn its name. Some aspirants gasped too much. Others learned quickly to make breath a coin they did not spend unless purchase was necessary. They passed a gate where a Deathwing veteran stood with his shield at rest and his mace like a scepter that had grown impatient. He did not look at faces. He looked at knees, shoulders, the angles of elbows. He could read whether a person would break from how they inhabited hinge and tendon. When the boy with the column spine passed, the veteran's gaze rested half a heartbeat, then moved on. The boy did not know that he had been noticed. He only knew his back hurt, and the pain felt like a promise. The corridor gave way to a chamber where the deck lost interest in straight lines. Cages had been welded into the walls, some empty, some not. The empties smelled of old fur and disinfectant. The occupied smelled of wet iron and breath that had learned to talk around chains. In the center stood a ring of low pillars, each a different height, each with iron rings set into its crown. Chains lay in coils like sleeping snakes. "Remove your shoes," said the taskmaster. "You will not require them again." Some bent at once and did as told. The girl with the hard jaw, her name had not yet been ruined, did not hesitate, but she folded her boots together and set them in a neat pair, as if order might be seen by whatever judges lurked. The boy with the column spine kicked his off and left them where they fell. Another aspirant, a stocky youth with scar scales on his knuckles, hesitated long enough for a deckhand to take his boots away for him. The deckhand's hands were gentle. That gentleness was the last he would afford anyone today. The taskmaster let silence sit until it made its point. The crucible of ash tests instinct and obedience. Chains will be applied. Run when the lamp is green. Fight when the lamp is red. Stop when the lamp is black. If you disobey, we are obliged to agree with your disobedience in a terminal fashion. If you falter, others will finish the work you began. Do not make yourself into debris in their path. Lamps around the chamber burned a steady amber. The taskmaster gestured. Serfs moved like a choreography learned in childhood. Chains rose, wanted wrists, found them. Ankles learned new circles. Weight redistributed. Bodies acquired a music of iron. The lamp blinked green. The gates in the cages did not open. A door at the far end did. They ran. It took exactly 9 strides for stumbling to become selection. The chamber beyond was a maze designed by someone who enjoyed the argument between bone and hard corners. Floors dipped, rose, shuddered as if something vast turned in asleep under the plates. Vent slits exhaled hot breath that tasted of incense and grit. Every length or so, the maze offered a choice. A low tunnel that punished the tall, a narrow one that hated the broad, a staggered set of risers that turned legs into arithmetic problems. The girl with the hard jaw took the narrow slit and made herself a blade. The boy with the column spine took the staggered risers in 3 counts, counting aloud without realizing it. The stocky youth shouldered toward the low tunnel and snarled when the chain ran out of slack and tugged his shoulders back to humility. Someone fell. Someone laughed. The laugh of a person surprised to discover they were still alive, but swallowed it when it changed the rhythm of their breath. A siren, thin as wire, sang a single high note. The lamps went red. The cages opened. They came out in a series of dictated gates. Some leaped as if joy had a body. Some dragged chains that complained in 3 languages. One simply unfolded to the size of a cupboard and ambled with the insolence of something that had never been taught a word that meant stop. The angels called them ash wolves because their fur had the sullen color and because names matter even when they are lies. Augmetic staples crawled like centipedes under the fur. Incense ash had been caked into the pelts until they smoked when they moved. There were others. A servitor construct on wheeled hindquarters with a front half that had been a bull perhaps 4 owners ago, now a rhino head of primer grey plate with tusk blades bolted where bone had been. Its eyes were auger lenses. It breathed in bursts that meant the pump was old. It wore the remains of a censer as a crown, and then a slender thing that might once have been a temple hound broke its posture and unfolded an extra joint in each leg, making itself a new animal halfway through a stride. "Fight," said the taskmaster, and did not need to say to whom. The boy with the column spine did not wait. Waiting was for people who believed in bargains. He wrapped his chain around his left forearm and jerked his right hand through a loop until the metal sang. The first ashwolf came low and wrong-footed, its left forepaw dragging where augmetic met meat, and the boy stepped to his own left, let the chain skim the jawline, and snapped it back. Teeth rang. Blood sprayed in a fine cartographic mist. The wolf, more insulted than injured, lunged again. The boy put his heel on its throat and pulled until it learned the meaning of stillness. The girl with the hard jaw chose numbers over heroics. She did not strike the beasts. She struck the people who panicked near her. When a thin aspirant in a scholar's coat froze in a triangle of corridors, She hit his shoulder where the muscle was slack and took his place at the apex. The bull servitor hit him a moment later and made theology out of him. When the ash hound with the extra joints tested her flank, she used another aspirant as an obstacle and did not apologize. She understood what trial meant. The stocky youth tried to be brave in the way stories teach. He roared when the first wolf came and met it straight, chains swinging like a farmer's flail. He landed a good blow that made the wolf's head misremember its attachment. The second beast used the moment to take his calf in its teeth and pull. The youth screamed in a voice that bent. The girl with the hard jaw saw him go to one knee. She considered the geometry, then moved on. He did not notice her decision. He was very busy dying in a circle of teeth and chain. A bell deep in the ship tolled once. It was not for them. It simply meant that somewhere a ritual was starting. The note made the wolves cock their heads for a fraction. The boy with the column spine used that fraction like a miser opening his hand. Once, briefly, he scrambled up a vertical ladder rung set into a wall, dragged himself onto a catwalk no wider than his thigh, and began to cross while the ladder sighed loose scales of rust. Below him, the bull servitor ran into the ladder and bent it to a shallow smile. The lamps flicked black. Everything stopped. The wolves stood with their mouths open, panting questions. The servitor constructs pumps slowed to idle. Aspirants froze in stupid positions that made statues of their worst instincts. One boy had his hand halfway to another's hair to pull him down, his fingers hanging like hooked birds. Lysa, at the rear with the deckhands, felt the stop move through her bones. She had known a man who forgot to obey a black lamp once. There had been no body to carry. There had been a fine dust that clung to the underside of everything for a week. "Learn," said the taskmaster, and the lamps were green. The maze became a river of bodies again. Red, green, black, red. The sequence did not repeat. It was not a pattern but a language, and the language kept changing its alphabet to see who could still read. Time became a rumor. The chamber walls recorded heartbeats and respiration. The wrath tasted salt and lactic acid in the air, and adjusted vents to be slightly less kind. Watchers in silence stood at intersections that no one had noticed were intersections until they were already behind them. If a person stepped the wrong way, a statue moved, and the story ended. A new door opened. The crowd poured through into a smaller room where the floor had been stippled with studs and drains. Brother statues stood in alcoves, their eyes dark. The drains were clean. This was not kindness. It meant someone had washed the room for the next batch and intended to keep washing it for all the batches there would ever be. The lamp burned red. From 4 hatches in the ceiling, chains descended with hooks that had no appetite except what was given to them. "Climb," said the taskmaster. "Do not fall. The floor will be unhelpful." Studs bit skin. The boy with the column spine took the chain with the ruthlessness of someone who had once climbed a bell tower to prove a claim, and fallen, and learned what it meant to climb again. He wrapped the hook against his ribs so it would not make a punctuation mark of him if he slipped. Halfway up, the lamp went black. He stopped with his teeth on a breath and pretended to be a punctuation mark himself. Someone above him forgot what black meant and tried to scurry for a better grip. A brother statue moved. It was not a statue. It had been waiting to be grammar. A bolt pistol coughed once. Meat made a wet sound against steel. The body hung where it had been taught to hang. The lamp burned green and everyone learned a new respect for periods. They climbed into another corridor of indecisions. Food appeared at one junction. The kind of ration a ship feeds to crew it does not intend to keep long. Half the aspirants threw themselves forward. The girl with the hard jaw took one bar, bit it twice, and tucked it into the band of her shift. The boy with the column spine ate the whole bar and did not apologize. He needed the ability of his legs to continue. Contrition did not strike him as a source of calories. The stocky youth with the wrecked calf wound lay down and did not rise. They slept standing when the lamp gave them black, long enough to pretend to be trees. They drank from condensation, scraped into cupped hands when the vents exhaled cold. They learned to read the floor through the skin of their feet. They learned that when a Deathwing veteran turned his helmet a fraction, the world was about to rotate around a pain they had not previously known how to pronounce. At last the maze unrolled itself and became a hall with a ceiling so high it stopped being a ceiling. Chains lay in ordered coils at the edges like tamed rivers. In the middle, the ring of low pillars waited, patient as stones in a garden. A scoreboard of sorts, not numbers but names of virtues and vices laser-etched in columns, hung above, and lights walked up the virtues when someone did something difficult without making a complaint of it. The vices lit when panic tried to make a law. The taskmaster came to the center and lifted his shock stave as if it were a banner that had lost its cloth. "You have moved through the primary path," he said, calm as a ledger. "You will now be weighed for speed, for cooperation, for cruelty, for the ability to see the shape of the room without drawing a sketch. Show your weights." The lamp went red. A gate on the far side rolled back. Not beasts this time. Servitors with shields came in a slow line, forming a tortoise that had learned to fear nothing. Their front plates were scabbed with impact scars. Their eyes were empty in a way that did not insult the living. It merely reminded them of the fate of bad arithmetic. Behind the shields, cudgels. Behind the cudgels, needles on arms that telescoped with insect humor. "Break the line," the taskmaster said. "Do not be under it when it arrives." The boy with the column spine measured the distance, the cadence of the servitors' tread, the slop of their formation. He did not have numbers to name it with, but his body kept them for him, written in old bruises. He went to the girl with the hard jaw without pride and said, "Left shoulder dips." She glanced, not at him but at the shields, and saw what he meant. The third servitor in from the left carried its plate 2 fingers lower, the hinge protesting. "We make a mouth," she said. "Teeth," he said. They told no one else. They moved when the lamp went green, the boy drawing the chain across the dipped hinge, so the plate tried to bite its own pain. The girl ramming her shoulder into the seam, with the clean malice of someone who had always expected to be the knife, not the fruit. The hinge screamed. The plate buckled like a prayer left in the rain. The line tried to correct, to close the mouth. The girl shoved a smaller aspirant into the gap. He had the narrowness the gap needed. He also had a family name that would be recited in a quiet kitchen, and then never again. Others saw the breach and turned themselves into teeth, very willing, very late. The servitors, discovering this was a conversation now, brought the needles forward. The boy got a line of punctures across his ribs where a needle had wanted to sign his name. The girl took a cudgel on her forearm and let the limb go numb without making the face that invites mercy. Together they opened enough of the tortoise that the back rank had to make independent decisions. Some of those decisions were stupid. Stupidity makes honest graves. When the lamp went black, everything stopped again in a tableau that would have made a saint wince. The tortoise froze with its mouth open. An aspirant in the gap discovered that a panic breath can sit inside a chest, like a bird trapped behind glass for a very long time. When the lamp went green, the bird broke itself free, and the aspirant screamed and lost his place in the geometry and was a smear a moment later under a wheel. The lesson was not about sympathy. It was about the cost of making a sound at the wrong time. "Enough," said the taskmaster, when there were fewer faces to listen with. He looked at what was left with a craftsman's indifference to the sawdust. You will consider yourselves fed. The remainder of your hunger will be useful in the morning. There was no morning. There was a change in the color of the vents and the scent of the air. There was the suggestion that another ship elsewhere in the fleet might be watching a sunrise to lend the concept to those who had earned the idea. The aspirants sat against pillars in threes, fours, or alone. Some prayed. Some slept immediately as if sleep were a trapdoor and they had found the lever. The boy with the column spine pressed his hand to the punctures and counted them. 9. 9 was a good number for continuing. The girl with the hard jaw unwrapped her ration bar and ate the rest without looking left or right. She had decided what kind of animal she was. She had not decided whether animals could have names. Lisa stood with the deckhands by the door, shock staves grounded. She watched the survivors discover each other's shapes. She watched the watchers drift along the walls like small mistakes in architecture. She thought of Zephynis's name cut into the hall and how dust had hung in the candlelight like a parliament of tiny souls arguing about whether to fall. She did not feel holy. She felt necessary. It is not the same thing and is often better. When the vents changed again and the taskmaster rose without any cracking of joints, the survivors rose too. Their bodies made the sound of rope. The lamp burned a calm, institutional green. The door ahead sighed open and exhaled the clean chill of the apothecarian. Forward, the taskmaster said, voice unaltered by the fact that many fewer now obeyed. The flesh has said what it will about you. The knives will have their turn. They went. Behind them, servitors with mops and buckets came in with the small, patient dignity of those who put the world back together so that it can be broken with precision again. This has been Wrath of Angels, Chapter 7, Scene 2, Trials of Flesh. Chapter 7, Scene 3 follows. Wrath of Angels. Chapter 7, Scene 3, Trials of Faith. Aboard the Wrath of Angels, the Chamber of Lies and Pit of Ashes. 1 month after the Black March. Month 5, year 263. The 41st millennium. They came off the flesh decks into corridors polished like teeth. No ash underfoot now. No stink of beasts or hot chain metal. The air was scrubbed until it burned the lungs and left the taste of old coins on the tongue. Silence made a weather of its own. A pressure in the ears. A thin ringing, as if a hammer blow were coming, and the ship was bracing for it. Watchers in silence stood in shallow niches, small and hooded, hands folded as if in prayer. They did not breathe, and still several aspirants swore they could hear the tiny rustle of robes, the almost sound of turning heads. Light from the lumen strips bent around the watchers' outlines, in ways lamps do not ordinarily bend. At the threshold to the faith halls, the librarians waited in azure plate. Cream and burgundy robes fell in clean lines from their pauldrons. Scripture hung in sealed ribbons. Their staves whispered, wards at the tips giving off a heatless shimmer that made the air itch in the sinuses. Some were helmed, lenses aglow. Others were bareheaded, faces as calm and still as tomb lids. Varadiel stood among them, banner grounded, force blades point biting the deck by his boot. His eyes carried a faint inner light. It wasn't brightness exactly, more like exhaustion that had learned to burn. The aspirants felt his attention pass over them, the way a surveyor's plumb line finds the truth in a wall. Something in bone answered to him, a small flinch at the level of marrow. You enter the chamber of lies, he said. He didn't raise his voice, but it filled the hall and left nowhere for breath to hide. The warp will offer you what you crave. It will speak with the faces you love. Faith subtracts. Choose subtraction. No one answered. Nails bit palms. A few shaped the sign of the Aquila, with fingers shaky from the flesh trials. The boy with the column spine whispered a number, 9, like a talisman he had invented for himself. The doors parted. Cold washed outward with the smell of dust and old glass. They stepped inside. The chamber was round, ribbed with stone like a mouth prepared to speak. Tall mirrors marched the walls in a broken ring. Every pane was webbed with cracks, each web a slightly different geometry. The floor was laid in scripture tiles, one word to a slab: oath, memory, blood, sin. The stone felt faintly warm through bare feet, as though some slow heart drummed far below. Their reflections came up at first. Pinched faces, ash-streaked throats, shoulders held too high, eyes too wide. Then the cracks softened. The glass learned how to be water. Other shapes walked in. A village boy found his mother waiting in the mirror, apron stained with dye, fingers red to the knuckles, hair bound with twine. "Gavril," she said, voice cut from years in kitchens. "Enough. Come home. Your brothers will laugh and say you've grown. I have bread in the oven." He pressed both palms to the glass. It was warm, not glass warm, but skin warm. He stepped, and sunlight swallowed him. Blue door, smell of loaf. A chair set out because someone had remembered him before he arrived. Then the mirror rehardened. Gavril slammed to the scripture tiles, neck folded wrong, mouth still smiling. The word blood took him with a kind of grim politeness. A scholar's son saw himself, taller, broader, bone-white plate with black script like cracks in ice, helm tucked casually under one arm. His own face smiled from the mirror. "You have already passed," it said kindly. "You have already bled. Rest." The boy sobbed with naked relief, reached out. The reflection's hand shot forward and closed around his throat. He jerked. A bolt pistol coughed from the gallery, neat as punctuation. The scholar's son collapsed across memory, blood threading the letters. A girl named Marianne saw her little sister racing through summer barley with ribbons in her hair. Ribbons the exact green the sky becomes before rain. "Don't leave me, Marie." The vision laughed, wind in its voice. "You promised." Marianne pinched skin from her own palms until it tore, tasted iron, and kept her gaze down at the tiles. "You are not," she said through her teeth, not trusting herself to say, "You are not her." The barley filed itself back into the mirror with a rustle of silk. The ribbons went to dust. A boy who had buried a brother last winter found him alive in the mirror, face clean, cough gone. "I forgave you," the brother said, and opened his arms. The boy went to him with the ragged sound that forgiveness draws out of the throat. He vanished into the glass, which obligingly held him for a beat, the way a pond accepts a thrown stone. When the surface settled, the boy was on the tiles on his back, eyes open as if looking for a roof that wasn't there. A devout child knelt before a false emperor, all golden radiance, palms wide in benediction. The light looked like honey poured warm. "Beloved," the not emperor said, "lay down the weight. You have pleased me already." The child sobbed and reached out two tiny hands. The golden mouth widened and widened until there was no face, only a hole. The child tried to crawl backward. The bolt round took him through the shoulder blades. He twitched twice and was still. His blood ran in a rectangle around the word sin and made a border a scribe would have admired. The defiant youth from the flesh trials, who had spat at saints and got away with it, met the mirror with his father behind it, drunk, roughly tender the way bad fathers are when they're in public. "Proud of you, boy," the man said, voice trembling as if he had borrowed it. It was more mercy than the youth had ever been given real. His face folded, and he bent to the glass like a pilgrim to a relic. At the last instant he caught himself, jerked his head away as if from a dog that sometimes bites. Too late, he told the mirror, and stepped aside. The father's face changed, something slack around the mouth, the look a trap gives when the bait is untouched. The mirror went black. An orphan saw nothing at all. His glass held only the broken web and the dumb, sensible face he wore when people were unkind. He waited for a trick that did not arrive. He swallowed once. After a long time, he said very softly, "Truth." He did not move again. A thin aspirant in a scholar's robe began to recite catechisms. He didn't stop when his dead grandmother appeared, didn't stop when she began to hum the lullaby she had used to hush him in storms. He pressed his nails into the meat of his cheeks until crescents of blood printed there and kept on reciting. At the 43rd line, he forgot a phrase. His voice stumbled. He did not die. He simply began to cry as if the missing line were a lost tooth his tongue could not stop seeking. A girl in a torn shift met herself in the glass, not future armored, not angelic, only herself, older, with rest in the eyes. That self said, "You can lie down. Sleep is not betrayal." The girl shook her head, once small. "Sleep comes to the obedient," she said, "not the other way." The mirror fogged as if with breath. Then nothing. A boy who had held 3 bead names in the flesh trials watched those beads in the mirror roll across a table. They spelled the names on their own and lined themselves up as if waiting to be counted. A woman's hands, his mother's, tidied them, smoothed them, set a 4th bead down with the blank side up as if inviting inscription. The boy put his hands at his sides and clenched them there so hard something in the right wrist popped. He didn't look away until the hands withdrew and the beads rolled off the table and fell without sound. One aspirant chose wrong in a way that left nothing to shoot. He went very still and smiled, a blissed, stupid smile, and then his jaw unhinged and his tongue climbed backward like a thing trying to escape a house on fire. He dropped bonelessly and lay there breathing thinly, eyes unfocused. A chaplain came down the steps and ended it with a mercy round, not unkindly. Varadil watched as if listening to a language everyone else misheard. The illusion showed to him in warp shadow, hooks wrapped in old words, threads of meaning ready to cinch tight around the soft meat of a soul. Each time he felt one take hold, he gripped his staff harder and made himself a wall. He had promised himself he would not interfere. Faith cannot be borrowed. But when a whole family knelt in a hearth-lit room and prayed to a God whose face would not hold still, he flinched. Something old moved in his gaze, a memory like ash under a fingernail. Bodies were edged out through side doors by serfs who had learned that one good turn of the wrist keeps a smear from tracking. The floor drank blood through channels cut for that purpose long ago by people who had known they were building a room for truths that never arrived gently. Survivors stood with their hands on themselves, as if confirming outlines, as if the mirrors might have stolen a curve here, a bone there. At last the pains dulled, the chamber cooled by a degree, and the aspirants felt the difference like a kindness. A door unsealed with a long inward breath. Firelight wrote itself along the jamb and up the ribs of the ceiling. They moved toward the glow. The hall of the pit was wide, the roof gone up into shadows where the light could go no further. In the middle, a mouth in the floor burned, fire thin and pale as bone, hardly flames at all, more like devotions expressed in heat. Braziers ringed the pit. Their bases had been cut from green-black stone veined like old leaves. The first breath of heat reached with the sour sweetness of burned hair, parchment, rose ash. On a plinth lay the confiscated things, satchels, scrap cloths, carvings, a child's ribbon, a ring, a bead string, a sliver from a saint's reliquary dulled at the edges by fingers. A parchment corner with a name on it in charcoal. The goods of love and memory. The trash of faith. Melchizedek stood above in a gallery, Crozius across his chest, hood making a cave of his eyes. When he spoke, iron fell down the walls as sound. Burn them, hesitate and you are false. The line formed itself, because people will arrange for their own judgment if you give them a long enough room. A devout boy went first. He grabbed his crude emperor idol and didn't kiss it, didn't look at it. The book alone, he said, and fed it to the pit. The wood blackened wetly, curled like a beetle dying under a boot. A tall youth with steady hands unwrapped cloth to find a ring too big for him. He turned it once in his fingers the way a man turns a coin he could spend and does not. "Forgive me, father," he said to the metal, and laid it in the fire. He had not hesitated long enough to die. Melchizedek let him pass, the judgment quiet as a shoulder relaxing. A girl reached the plinth and hurled a saint's finger bone into the pit with a noise in her throat halfway between sob and laugh. "Take it all," she told the flames, like a lover picking a fight. Sparks jumped as if amused. "Wrath may yet shape you," Melchizedek said, not unhopeful. A boy with eyes like dry wells dropped a parchment with a name on it. He did not see it burn. He was listening to a bell only he could hear. Lysa, watching from the floor with the deck detail, felt something in her ribcage adjust to the sight and make room. The bead boy came with 3 names knotted to a string. He kissed them with lips white from pressure, then held them over the fire without letting go. The seconds became an accusation. The chamber seemed to lean. Somewhere a safety catch lifted. Melchizedek lowered his Crozius a fraction. The bolt pistol coughed. The beads jumped from the boy's hand as he folded, knocking against each other in a bright, wooden clatter that sounded like laughter if you had the wrong kind of ear. They tumbled into the flame and went black in 3 heartbeats. A woman-child with a scar in one eyebrow set a curl of her own hair on the coals. The smoke took on a smell like a winter hearth. She did not cry. She watched until the last red thread vanished, and then signed herself with ash on the brow. A gesture from a religion the wrath did not keep. Allowed because gestures are ammunition, and this one spent itself at the point of making. The defiant youth from earlier slammed a locket down, portrait already torn out. "I won't carry your face into this," he told the one whose face the locket had been. He pushed the locket into the flame with 2 fingers and kept them there an instant longer than pain permitted because he meant it. When he pulled his hand back, the tips were glossy and blistered. He set his jaw against the flinch and looked up at the chaplain as if to demand a mark be taken. Melchizedek regarded him a breath and gave him nothing that could be used as pride. A shepherd's daughter unwrapped a tiny shoe, her dead baby brother's. She held it to her cheek once in a movement so private it felt like a theft to watch. Then she laid it into the fire the way a midwife lays a child into a mother's arms and turned away with the world gone tighter across the shoulders. A boy who had no relic because he had owned nothing set his own name into the fire. He had written it on his palm in charcoal on the flesh decks because he feared forgetting it. He held his hand flat over the flame until the skin blistered and the letters smeared to an ugly ruin. Melchizedek did not shoot him. Varadiel above felt the shape of that choice, the way burning the name on skin might be counted as both destruction and keeping. A sour-faced aspirant spat into the fire after his token, as if to salt the offering. The flame recoiled and hissed the way a cat does when you try to comfort it. A few serfs looked at one another and kept their faces flat. Signs are to be noticed, not discussed. 2 lingered too long after that, as if time had softened in their hands like wax, and might be squeezed into a different shape by the right pleading. The pistol spoke, twice, with the patient rhythm of punctuation. The bodies were tidied with the efficiency of people who clean spaces that never remain clean for long. The girl with the hard jaw came when her turn came, and cast a green ribbon into the pit without changing her face. Smoke curled after her like a hand wanting to catch hold. She did not lend it a name. She turned and left the plinth with her back very straight, as if balancing a weight there she had decided to carry high. The boy with the column spine laid a small wood carving in the fire and whispered, 9. Not as a prayer, not as a hope, as an accounting entry. The flame ate the carving without flourish. He watched it go as a clerk watches a sum balance, not satisfied, merely confirmed. One by one, tokens became ash. The fire altered its manners accordingly, sometimes a sudden white flare, sometimes a low guttering as if in disgust, sometimes nothing at all. The thing simply unbeing with a snap like a string breaking at the far end of a room. When there was nothing left on the plinth, the pit stood up in its own brightness. For a heartbeat, the flames offered faces, hands, the curve of a broken sword, pareidolia out of heat and wish. Then even the wishless shapes surrendered, and the light steadied to bone pale again. Varadil came down. He moved like a man listening to a voice inside a wall. He stood at the rim, raised his palm over the fire, and drew the heat up without touching it. The flames leaned toward his hand, as dogs lean toward the bowl. Glyphs formed in the upward reach, shapes mortals did not read, but that left iron on the tongue and a faint ache as if a tooth somewhere far back were remembering an old hurt. Then the fire folded inward, like a throat closing, and vanished with a hiss. Smoke rose, wound itself to the vents in tight cords, and disappeared into the ship's lungs. The smell it left was hair, paper, a trace of sugared almonds, the human brain's tricksy name for burnt things it insists were sweet once. You have been broken of memory, Varadil said. The tiredness in his voice did not blunt it. Tired words often cut cleaner. Faith remains. The wrath will supply the rest. No one answered. A few wept the new way. Shoulders not moving, mouth closed, only water working its path over skin. The shepherd's daughter had ash on her hands and did not wipe them. The defiant youth flexed two blistered fingers again and again, as if looking for a music they might still make. The girl with the hard jaw stood as if her bones had discovered a new angle, not weaker, simply narrower. Melchizedek lifted his Crozius, and the cage candles along the gallery drew themselves taller, each flame a spine. You are less now, he said. Good. Emptiness is the beginning of obedience. The less you are, the better you fit the armor we will make of you. A watcher in silence stood by the pit and turned its hooded face toward the aspirants in a motion just large enough to be called a nod if you wanted that blessing. It was gone at the next blink, the way a good omen is gone, leaving behind action, not argument. The doors at the far end unsealed. White light lay across the floor like a blade. Sterile air came in, all lemon metal and quiet humming. The apothecarian waited. Steel beds, hanging rigs of tools like insect legs, mechadendrites slowly tasting the air with the delicacy of predators who have learned restraint. Somewhere far below the ship's bones, the engines shifted their weight, and the whole deck groaned approval. A sound felt more than heard. The survivors stepped forward into the light. Behind them, the pit breathed out its last thin threads of smoke and went as cold as a closed book. Ahead, knives would speak in their frank language. Somewhere between the two, Faith, having subtracted, took inventory of what remained. A number whispered under breath, a ribbon relinquished without a glance, a hand that had held a ring long enough and then not. The Wrath closed the doors and began to count. This has been Wrath of Angels, Chapter 7, Scene 3, Trials of Faith. Chapter 7, Scene 4 follows. Wrath of Angels. Chapter 7, Scene 4, The Apothecarian's Tribunal. Aboard the Wrath of Angels, Apothecarian vaults and surgical decks, 1 month after the Trials of Faith. Month 6, year 263, the 41st millennium. The doors sealed behind them with a hiss, cutting off the smoke of the pit of ashes. Ahead stretched a hall of steel and light. The Apothecarian did not resemble a place where men lived. It resembled the inside of a skull polished clean, all white lumen strips and chrome surfaces. The gleam of tools suspended from racks like the mandibles of insects. Beds were lined in ranks, each rimmed with harnesses and chains. Drains cut deep into the floor. The air was thick with sterilizing incense, lemon metal, and a tang of burning phenol, sharp enough to claw the throat. Mechadendrites dangled from the ceiling, twitching lazily, gloved in surgical steel. They turned toward the aspirants as if sniffing. At the far end, apothecaries in bone-white plate waited. Their gauntlets were clean, but their armor bore stains and fine scars that soap could not remove. Their helms glowed with ruby lenses. Where chaplains carried crozius and flame, these priests bore saws, injector wands, drill-tipped instruments that purred faintly even at rest. The aspirants stopped. The boy with the column spine counted the beds, lips moving. Too many. He swallowed, shifted weight. The girl with the hard jaw glanced once at the drains cut into the floor. They ran long and straight, built to carry waste out quick. She set her shoulders. She had seen slaughter floors before. Melchizedek's voice came from a balcony above, cold and inevitable. Faith was subtraction. Now flesh will be measured. Varadil stood beside him, pallid, one hand resting lightly on his force blade, eyes glowing faintly as though strained from within. The survivors were herded to the benches. Chains closed over wrists and ankles. Lumen strips brightened to an intensity that hurt. The tribunal began. Examinations. The first aspirant laid down was a broad-shouldered youth with muscles hardened from farm labor. An apothecary approached, mechadendrites unfurling like hungry serpents. Steel tips traced his chest, his jaw, his skull. Bone density acceptable, the apothecary said. His voice was thick and mechanical, amplified through helmvox. Cardiac rhythm steady. Lung capacity strong. One gauntlet seized the aspirant's arm, wrenched it up, flexed elbow and shoulder with indifference. Candidate suitable. A needle hissed. The youth gasped as fluid was driven into his neck. The mechadendrites wrote numbers onto slates as calmly as scribes recording tax. The boy was unchained and marched to another bed where augmetics waited. The second aspirant was thin, ribs showing beneath bruised skin. He shook as he lay flat, eyes rolling to follow the steel limbs. The apothecary did not hesitate. Insufficient mass, heart stutters, spine curvature evident. A mechadendrite flashed, a saw-tipped appendage descending with sudden grace. The boy screamed once, his head rolled neatly to the side, mouth still open. Blood streamed into the drains, vanishing without splash. The apothecary moved on, already reading the next file. No one reacted. Even the aspirants who had known him only a few hours clenched their jaws and looked away. Faith had demanded subtraction. Now flesh did the same. A girl with close-cropped hair lay down next. The mechadendrites curled over her like a spider tasting prey. They probed her chest, ears, throat. One sliced a thin line across her bicep and sampled blood. The data scrolled on a holoslate. Blood irregularities, said one apothecary. Markers unstable. Purge, another answered. The girl twisted, fighting the chains. No, I endured the wolves. I passed the mirrors. A mechadendrite drove into her throat. Her words ended in a wet gargle. A drill word. Red sprayed against the lumen strips. The drains drank deeply. When she stilled, her body was unshackled, rolled aside onto a gurney, and covered with a sheet marked with black scripture. The fourth aspirant trembled as he lay down. His chest was broad, but one leg dragged slightly, an old brake set poorly. The apothecary tilted his head, lenses glimmering. Deficiency noted. Another apothecary leaned close, reading data streams. Compensating musculature sufficient. Neural pathways strong. Recommend inclusion. A pause. Debate flickered between the faceless helms. At last, candidate marginal. Proceed. The boy exhaled shudderingly. Chains were released. A mortal serf guided him to the augmetic wards. His limp was stark against the white tiles, but he lived. One by one, they were weighed. Strong frames were marked for implantation. Weak ones died screaming beneath scalpels. Some deaths were quiet. An injection, a sigh, a stillness. Others were spectacular. Skulls opened with drills, torsos split with surgical saws, organs removed for later study. The drains carried all equally. A scribe recorded each verdict on parchment. He did not look at the aspirants. His lips moved constantly, copying the judgments. Accepted, rejected, purged, implanted. Beside him, another serf vomited quietly into a bucket, then returned to cleaning the floor with rags dipped in disinfectant. The girl with the hard jaw endured her turn. She lay still, refusing to flinch, as steel fingers opened her mouth, examined teeth, measured her chest. Bone strong, the apothecary intoned. Neural resilience high, candidate approved. The boy with the column spine also survived. Anomalous rhythm in cardiac pattern, one noted, but tolerable, adaptable. Subject retains instinct for survival, approved. The room's liturgies. The room itself had its liturgies. Every 12 heartbeats, the lumen strips brightened a fraction and dimmed again, a false respiration. Every third verdict, a censer servitor rolled past the benches, trailing lemon metal incense to cauterize the air. Its censer was a reliquary head, with the jaw fused shut, smoke hissing through the teeth. On the back wall, a brass plate bore a prayer few could love, and none could mistake. The knife is an honest tongue. Lisa worked the near aisle with a pail and a squeegee, wrists aching in the cold light. When a drain gurgled, she felt it in the soles of her boots. The first time she'd cleaned this hall, she'd tried to keep count of the dead. The number had turned her stomach into a fist. Today, she did not count. She rinsed, swabbed, wrung the grey rag, and kept the floor from becoming a lie. A pair of apothecaries approached a boy whose face was still round with youth. Temper test, one said. A mechadendrite extended an iron stylus and drew it, suddenly, across the boy's cheek. He jerked and snarled, snapping at the metal like a chained dog. Instability, the first concluded. Trainable? Asked the second without interest. Not at speed. The bolt round was almost gentle. Lisa flinched, then bent to catch the slick before it laced away from the drain. A girl with eyes like wet stone lay down and held herself still by an effort visible in the cords of her neck. The tools probed, clicked, inscribed her shape into slates. Osseous density high, one read. Psychometric calm. He snapped a finger beside her ear. She didn't blink. Candidate exemplary, the other said, and for once the word had no sarcasm in it. The girl was unchained and moved to the far bench with a step that made nothing of fear. Then a case that drew even Varadil's gaze. The aspirant's blood showed a filigree of broken markers, a genealogy threaded with fevers and famine. Blight in the line, an apothecary said. Not contagious, still weak. Spine, another asked. Straight. The first did not sigh. Their training did not include sighs. Neural grit present. Recommend conditional. Define conditional. Melchizedek's voice drifted from above, bone dry. Trial ligature, came the answer. A mechadendrite lowered a collar of dark iron onto the aspirant's throat. The collar hummed once and went cold. The boy swallowed. If he fails any further measure, the collar will agree with his failure, the apothecary said, and turned away, already measuring the next soul. Varadiel's banner cloth stirred in a wind that wasn't in the room. His eyes flared, then softened. The boy met his gaze with a look like a cut nail, small, hard, unquestionably metal. Varadiel looked away first. Further down, the borderline limp boy was stopped again, this time by a mortal medicure in an oilcloth apron. Gait analysis, she said, not unkind. Walk to the mark. Back. He did. Again, faster. He did. She made a note, pressed 2 fingers into the muscles just above his knee until he grunted. Compensation acceptable, she called and added quieter. Learn to fall forward. Implantations. Racks hissed open to reveal organ canisters suspended in gel. A brass placard named each in Old High Gothic and Workman Low. Oculobe, sight. Osmodular, bone. Biscopea, muscle. Secondary heart, reserve. Laramans, clot. Betchers, acid. Catalepsian, wake. The names were not poetry. They were invoices. Each had a ledger line waiting to be marked paid. The first to be laid down was the farm-shouldered youth. His chest was cut open by a descending blade, ribs pried apart like shutters. He screamed until an injector plunged into his throat, silencing him with chemicals. A second mechadendrite lowered a canister the size of a man's fist, gene seed tissue, suspended in nutrient gel. It was pressed into the cavity, veins sutured around it by whirring needles. His body convulsed. Monitors flared. The apothecaries adjusted feeds with all the emotion of men tuning an engine. Another aspirant, barely 15, thrashed as tubes pierced his spine. White foam frothed at his mouth. Rejecting, an apothecary said flatly. A drill descended. His skull opened in 4 neat petals. His brain was lifted free, examined, discarded. The husk was wheeled away. The girl with the hard jaw clenched her teeth as mechadendrites slid beneath her ribs. Fluid burned into her veins. She bit through her lip, blood running down her chin. When her eyes rolled back, the apothecaries watched the monitors without comment. After long minutes, the readings stabilized. Candidate stable, implantation successful. Chains released. She collapsed sideways, shuddering, alive. The boy with the column spine counted numbers under his breath as the blades descended. 9, 10, 11. He gasped when steel entered his chest, when fluid seared his veins. The count wavered, resumed. 12. The apothecaries noted his persistence. He survived, some did not. One aspirant's chest ruptured under the strain. Another's heart exploded when new tissue refused to bond. The drains ran steadily, crimson diluted to rosewater by the flush systems. Through it all, the apothecaries did not falter. They murmured only data. Respiration steady, neural conductivity high. Reject, retain, proceed. They were not executioners. They were craftsmen, trimming excess clay until only the shape remained. The calm-eyed girl received the osmodular first. Blades parted the sternum with a sound like someone opening an old book. The organ slid in, a pallid thing that looked offended by light, and the mechadendrites stitched it to her ribs with wire as fine as hair. She arched like a bow. The straps sang. Hold. an apothecary murmured, and the chemicals did their silent work. His breathing found a new rhythm, hitching, evening. "Accepts," said the Vox. The defiant youth, spared once for his sheer ferocity, took the Biscopea. Veins bulged, pumps drove a black-gold slurry into his bloodstream. He began to laugh, no humor, all pressure relief, until a mask dropped over his mouth and replaced laugh with sleep. "Contain," said the apothecary, as if recommending a lid for a pot. The collar boy with the trial ligature made his turn under the tools. The collar hummed once, a warning or simply acknowledgement. He bared his teeth and did not make a sound. The mechadendrites sank a small pale seed under his ribs. The collar cooled. "Conditional accepted," the apothecary recorded, and for the first time the boy let his shoulders settle against the metal like a man sitting briefly in a chair he might one day own. The boy with the column spine took the catalepsian node. The drill whined as it kissed the base of his skull. "9, he said into the headrest. The drill bit through. 10. A cotton taste bloomed under his tongue. The world narrowed to a keyhole. 11. A mechadendrite injected clear fluid. The keyhole widened back to a corridor. 12. He breathed and shivered, and did not stop counting until someone put a hand flat on his ribs and said, without heat, "Enough." Failures were frequent. One aspirant's chest swelled, stitches tearing neat smiles along the incision. He looked surprised, as if the world had told a joke in a language he almost understood. Then white became red. "Rejecting," said an apothecary. The drill spoke. The ledger agreed. Not all the work was knives. One apothecary knelt beside a borderline candidate and spoke in a catechismal tone while needles climbed the boy's veins. "You will feel heat. That is not fire. You will feel your chest grow heavy. That is not drowning. You will want to close your eyes. Do not. We must see you. If you are to be blind later, it must be because we decide it, not because you chose it." The boy kept his eyes open, tears balanced perfectly until one slipped and left a trail to his ear. Overhead, Varadil's banner lifted in a breath no human drew. He reached, not touching anyone, into the room's heavy air and plucked at threads only he could see. Aspirants' minds glowed to him like coals in different stages. Some white-hot, some dull with ash, one flickering like a candle crouched in a draught. He did not feed any flame, he marked them. The drafted candle flared a sliver brighter and steadied, not by gift, but because recognition is sometimes oxygen. A mortuary lock yawned open at the far wall. Gurneys rolled silently into a chamber washed with frostlights. There was no sermon for the dead, no hymn, just a single chime that sounded not in the ear, but in the bones. The sound the Wrath used for endings. Through a small armored viewport, Lysa saw, brief as a blink, a scatter of ash-silver motes blossom into the void like a handful of seeds thrown at night. She let herself watch them until they were gone. Then she put the rag back on the floor and resumed drawing straight, practical lines. At the end of the run, when the last clamp had been released and the last gurney had slid out toward cold, a watcher padded between the benches. It carried, absurdly, a parchment ribbon no wider than a finger. It pressed the ribbon to the sternum of the calm-eyed girl. The ash stuck there as if wetted. There was nothing written on it in any ink a mortal could see. She did not touch it. She did not dare. Melchizedek watched the little rite and said nothing, which was as close to approval as some acts ever earned. Somewhere in the ship's ribs, a deep structure shifted, the way a sleeper turns over without waking. The deck underfoot gave a quiet, satisfied creak. The Wrath was an accountant. She had tallied inputs and outputs and found them encouraging, closing. When the final aspirant was unshackled, the benches lay wet with blood and chemical foam. Covered corpses waited on gurneys at the hall's edge, scripture sheets already blackened with null seals. Servitors trundled forward, carrying the dead toward void chambers where the ship would swallow them. The survivors sat hunched, wrapped in grey shrouds, their veins still glowing faintly with chemical fire. Their eyes were wide, unblinking. They were half made, half ruined, bodies remolded into something new. Varadiel raised his hand. The air stirred. The survivors felt pressure at the backs of their skulls, like invisible fingers probing, testing. "They are tethered," he said quietly. His eyes dimmed, relief crossing his face like a shadow moving across stone. Melchizedek's voice rang down from the gallery. "Flesh has been weighed. You are becoming. That is enough." A watcher in silence moved between the benches, inspecting the half-made with its blind hood. It paused before the boy with the columned spine, tilted its head a fraction, then turned away. Approval, or merely recognition? Doors opened at the far end. A corridor yawned, lit with stained glass glow. The tournament waited above decks. The survivors rose shakily, guided by serfs. Behind them, drains gurgled as fresh water swept away the evidence. Ahead, banners stirred in cold air. The wrath groaned through her bones, satisfied. This has been Wrath of Angels, Chapter 7, Scene 4, The Apothecarian's Tribunal. Chapter 7, Scene 5 follows. Wrath of Angels. Chapter 7, Scene 5, The Tournament. Aboard the Wrath of Angels, Arena of Judgment, 3 months after the Apothecarian's Tribunal. Month 9, year 263, the 41st millennium. The climb to the upper decks turned into a litany of metal and breath. Recruits trudged beneath arches, ribbed like the inside of a leviathan's throat, each span of iron scripture humming faintly with mag sound, as if the ship were praying to itself. Shock prods tapped ankles when anyone flagged. Chains at wrist knocked together in shy applause at each stumble. A drumbeat traveled down the corridor ahead of them, slow, deliberate, a heartbeat large enough to belong to a city. Incense met them first. Thick, tarry smoke rolled down the final stair, not sweet but medicinal, threaded with lemon metal and the steadier bite of burnt resin. The last landing widened under stained glass that shone with its own lumen, suddenly banishing the bruised light of the stair. Angels strode across those panes, bone and emerald giants lifting blades in victory over a bestiary of ugly truths, and the laid between the panes looked like black sutures holding a wound closed. The arena was not a pit. It was a cathedral that had decided to be honest. Pillars the width of town towers rose into shadow. From each, banners of the hexagrammaton fell in heavy folds. Winged swords, raven black chevrons, fire-winged daggers, bone hand upon a black field. The air carried the ion shiver of active shields, subtle as a threat kept in pocket. Galleries ringed the space, thick with mortals. Serfs in ash-stained robes gripped the balustrades hard enough to whiten knuckles. Scribes stood straight-backed, styluses hovering, and then lowered them. No one wanted to be the sound out of turn. Children peered between sleeves and belts, with the solemn curiosity of those who know they must not squeal where gods can hear. The hush wasn't polite. It was gravitational. Sound could not climb out of it. At the center of the marble floor lay a ring of scripture, cut so deep, the letters had shadows. Only 2 words, heavy enough to be a sentence and a life, weighed and measured. The marble was black, veined faintly green, as if the quarry had remembered a forest too long. Chains fell away. The recruits stood in the ring on sore feet, the smell of old blood scrubbed thin but still present. the clean taste of incense sitting behind their teeth. Some looked up at the banners and pressed their lips together like people who have learned the correct shape of bravery. Some kept their eyes on the floor because stone does not judge and will still be there when judgment passes. On the dais, the judges arranged the air simply by existing. Chaplain Melchizedek stood with his crozius across his chest, the head a winged hammer with scripture etched into its faces so closely the letters themselves seemed like knurls for better grip. His hood erased the top half of his skull helm. Vox grill made his voice a thing that arrived already chiseled. Faith has been weighed, he said. Flesh has been cut. You remain. Now subtraction continues against an equal measure. You will be weighed against yourselves. Commander Seraphiel stood with his bone-white gauntlet relaxed and terrible, cloak falling like a cliff. Light from a pane of crimson glass ran across his plate in a narrow river. He did not speak. Silence is only silence when it is without intention. Seraphiel's quiet was a statement with edges. Varadil planted his banner and let the staff take a fraction of weight no one else would have guessed he carried. The eyes beneath his hood were not lights. They were strain given a color. The aspirants felt him the way they had felt him in the faith halls. A pressure at the back of the skull, a dry hand testing a hinge. Watchers in silence lined the dais, small, hooded, their staves planted. They made the air around them a little colder and ate motion from the corners of vision. A gong noted the beginning. It did not ring, it stated. Servitors rolled in racks of training blades, steel, single edge, blunted enough not to cut meat cleanly, heavy enough to break it. Deckhands carried round shields, scarred with old paint, leather grips polished by older fear. Lisa was among them, keeping her eyes down when she passed within arm's length of the angels, as if proximity to holiness might ignite an unworthy gaze. Melchizedek raised his crozius. Pairs, he said. The ring answered by sorting itself. Names were not called. The wrath had its own grammar, and bodies obeyed. The recruits' duels. First bout. A farm-shouldered boy named Hadriel. Not that it mattered. The ship took names the way the sea takes jars of tears. Faced a wiry, gutter-quick boy, whose eyes had learned how to be old. They took their blades and shields with the same flinch, then settled into two different poises. Hadriel square and honest, the wiry boy bladed and elastic. Drumbeat, step. Hadriel swung with the truth of someone who has broken stubborn doors. The wiry boy slid inside the arc and cracked his shield rim against Hadriel's knee. Hadriel dropped half a span and turned, stubborn strength becoming momentum. The wiry boy took a sting across the ribs rather than be caught under the next stroke. Breath wheezed. He laughed, a tiny short thing like a cough that had chosen optimism, then feinted left and stamped on Hadriel's instep so hard that even the gallery felt the sound in their teeth. Hadriel's blade clanged off the marble. Yield, Melchizedek intoned. Hadriel's shoulders fell. The blade went slack and then away. The wiry boy did not grin. This was arithmetic, not comedy. Second, two girls circled. Marianne, the hard jaw, the green ribbon gone to ash, and a taller, reed-boned candidate whose wrists spun the blade as if it were a shuttle in a loom. They tested shields. They tested distance. Then the taller one pressed. Marianne parried at the elbow instead of the blade, a rude correction, and drove forward with short, ugly chops built for city alleys, not tawny grounds. The reed-boned girl tried to widen the fight and found the marble ring had ended before the world did. They locked shields, face to face. Marian said nothing. The other whispered a line of catechism through blood-slick lips and found a second wind hiding behind the word, endure. She shoved, turned, and Marian hit the stone on one shoulder and rolled up again with the same economy. This time the reed-bone blade kissed her temple. Red came down like an argument losing. Yield. Marian's nod was smaller than a lie and more honest. Third, the defiant youth from the flesh decks, hands still glossy with old blister skin where he had pushed a locket into fire and met a scholar's son whose palms still bore crescent scars from nails pressed too hard in the chamber of lies. They saluted without elegance. The defiant youth advanced like a problem with a single solution. The scholar's son retreated, eyes flickering over angles, looking for a second solution. He found the corner of the script ring and angled his shield to make a hinge of it. The defiant one crashed in. Stone kept the scholar upright. He slipped his blade under the other's arm and levered. Pain made the defiant youth hiss but not stop. He banged the shield edge against the scholar's ear. A thin scream issued. The scholar's son went down half blind and scrabbling. He did not yield until the defiant one's knee pinned his forearm, and the blade's blunt tip dimpled the skin between eyes. Yield, Melchizedek said again, as if the word were a measure of oxygen. Fourth, the boy with the column spine, who counted when knives spoke, faced the collar boy, whose iron ring sat neat on his throat, humming faintly like a thought kept to oneself. They came together with caution rather than bravado. The column boy touched his blade to the collar boy's and said very quietly, "Left." They moved left together, and each met the other's guard as if rehearsed. The collar hummed a note. They broke. The column boy flicked his shield down, exposing shin. The collar boy took the invitation and struck, and found his blade trapped under a shield that had been waiting to fall. The collar hummed louder, offended by a heart spiking. The column boy eased, let the blade go, and pushed only with his shoulder. The collar boy slipped, regained balance, and grinned with all his teeth as if to say, "You saw me." They fenced that way a while, exchanging small truths. When the column boy's breath started to thread, the collar boy pressed and held him until his blade wavered, and then tapped his shoulder with an almost friendly courtesy. "Yield," said Melchizedek, less iron than before. Some yields are instruction, not failure. Fifth, a gaunt child barely past 13, eyes too big in a thin face, stood across from a farm girl with arms like ropes and a scar at one eyebrow from an accident involving a beast and bad timing. The child held the blade wrong at first and corrected when it bit his own shoulder. The farm girl lowered her shield by a finger to invite a swing, and the child took it, clanging steel on iron, then stumbled forward from his own effort. She caught him by the collar, spun him, wrapped the back of his thigh, and had him on his knees before he understood his feet had betrayed him. He refused to yield. She looked to the dais. Melchizedek waited. She wrapped him again lighter. He snarled, a little dog protecting a bone drawn in chalk. She bent, put her mouth close to his ear and said, "You live better if you choose it." His hand opened, blade on stone. Yield came out like a cough. The farm girl's nod included gratitude. "Thank you for not making me break you to teach you this." Sixth, the calm-eyed girl from the apothecarian, who had not blinked when fingers snapped by her ear, faced the reed-boned catechist who had bested Marian. They saluted with the exact same angle. First contact was so crisp it made a note. The calm-eyed girl didn't go for the blade. She worked at the reed girl's shoulder with shield pressure, clip-clip, forcing the joint to confess. The reed girl's mouth thinned. She tried to change levels, and the calm eye followed, unhurried, as if gravity had money on her. When the reed girl risked a high cut, Calm Eye stepped in and laid her forehead to the other's nose with a small, professional thud. Blues and stars sprayed. A second later, the blade was on the marble. "Yield," Melchizedek said, and the reed girl nodded while her eyes recalibrated the universe. 7th, Marian came back for the loser's bracket against the scholar's son, who had just learned that stones can act as hinges. They were both blood-striped and breathing in short, irritating pieces. This time, Marian did not press. She floated a step right, left, took the scholar's hunger to recover a dignity and set it against him. When they finally met, she let him have the first cut across her forearm. Pain made her pupils widen and then close in again to pinheads. The second exchange went her way. The third went to both, his blade on her ribs, hers under his wrist, a tiny click that tweaked a tendon like an overtuned string. He fumbled. She did not. "Yield," said the Crozius, and 2 breaths later, the scholar took his own advice. 8th, the defiant youth met Hedril, farm stubborn versus street wild, both with new bruises like last-minute maps. The first clash sounded like a cupboard falling. Defiant went low with a grin that had too many teeth. Hedril took the blow on bone and returned a shove that was also an apology for what came next. They brawled, blades forgotten, shields under knees and in throats, each discovering that the other was too heavy to be an idea. The defiant youth found Hadril's ear with a thumb, and the world went white around the farmhand's edges. He solved this by falling forward like a tree. Defiant died under the trunk for a second, then came up red-faced and laughing, in a voice that implied he understood jokes, especially the cruel ones. The bout ended with both men on their knees, wounds making bargains with the next breath. "Draw," Melchizedek said, which in this place meant continue later in a harsher language. By the time the round of pairings and revisions and second chances had finished, a ranking had emerged the way a distinct current emerges in a river. Not by decree, by flow. 6 remained in the ring that gravity made around winners. The calm-eyed girl, the collar boy, the wiry gutter old one, the farm girl with rope arms, the boy with the column spine, and Marian, who kept finding surfaces to push off from. The gong spoke again. Something changed in the weight of the room. Champions versus Astartes. Brothers of the Green Wing strode in from the east gate. Emerald plate with bone trim, battle scars like biographies, helms off so mortal eyes could learn the shape of transhuman faces. They carried combat blades with the casualness of men who can make a weapon of any limb, any object, any syllable. The galleries drew back as far as stone would allow. The recruits did not move. For some, muscles forgot how. Melchizedek's voice touched the floor, and the sound went everywhere. "Between you and the armor you desire lies a gulf. Measure it." First champion, the calm-eyed girl. Her opponent was a battle brother, with a scar that crossed his face from jaw to brow like a compass line, nose broken and badly reset a lifetime ago. He saluted with the blade. She did the same, smaller, exact. He moved as if a song were playing only for him. She read the rhythm by watching hips and shoulders, not the blade point. First exchange. Her shield rang, and arm bones learned a new respect for alloy. Second, she caught a thrust on the outside edge and turned it more than she had any right to. The brother's grin was a small, winter thing. He gave her a real feint. She refused it, punished the hand instead. A neat smack with the rim that left a line of white on green paint. It was nothing and everything. The third exchange he went through her like a decision. She hit the marble. The blade tip settled to the notch above her collarbone without touching skin. "Yield," Melchizedek said softly. She took an extra breath, then gave the nod. When she stood, something in her spine had more knowledge. Second, the collar boy. His brother was taller even by Astartes standards, a long-armed hunter with the kind of reach that makes the world smaller for others. The collar boy took center, blade low, eyes low, as if watching for a snake. The brother came in oblique, a line that would have ended a man of muscle, and no thinking. Collarboy was thinking. He didn't parry the blade. He parried the wrist with the flat and then cut at the thumb web. Subtle, wicked. The brother adjusted without a change in face, which is another form of approval. They circled. Collar hummed once, briefly. The recruit didn't flinch. He tried for an opening the size of a kindness and failed, but learned where not to knock. The brother accelerated, the difference between species becoming visible. 2 steps and the collar boy was on one knee under a weight he could not measure. He bared his teeth because that's what some animals do when the big animal shows its teeth first. Blade kissed throat. Yield. He did, and laughed, one huff, acknowledging a fact. Third, the farm girl. Her brother bore a born-on-ship face, pale, scarred in tidy professional lines. Their shields met with a noise like 2 doors closing. She leaned. He permitted the lean, then took her weight and gave it back with interest. She stumbled, learned, set her feet wider. He tested high, she caught. He tested low, she was late and paid in pain. She forced him to move his feet twice, which was already a story to tell herself later. When the blade took her across the belly, blunted and still murderous, she folded at the middle. The brother stepped back precisely the distance courtesy demanded and waited. She tried to stand in the instant before nausea. It was almost a stand. Yield. And she did. Not miserably, not gladly, merely correctly. Fourth, the wiry boy. He faced a brother with a smile that did not belong in war, and therefore was probably a weapon. They touched blades, and the first thing the brother did was nothing. The wiry boy blinked and swung for the nothing. The brother caught the blade in a lazy bind and looked at him, a beat too long. The lesson was not about swords. It was about the speed of thinking. The recruit recalibrated fast, fainted with his face, eyes to the left, body straight. And for one delicious half-heartbeat, the brother let him think it had worked. The cut scraped a line in paint. The brother applauded with his blade, 3 neat taps on the boy's rim, then took the fight seriously for 6 steps and 1 spin. Marble met skull. Yield, said the world, and the wiry boy, to his credit, tried to say no before his mouth remembered how to say yes. Fifth, the boy with the column spine. He counted under his breath without meaning to, a rhythm found in the apothecarian and now repurposed. His brother was square and old in the way only a warrior can be old, no spare movements, all the unnecessary shaved off. Begin, and the older man did not. He waited for the boy to tell the truth about himself. The first cut said, "I believe in right angles." The brother gave him a circle. The second said, "I will not be baited." The brother set bait and did not take it either, which is a higher cruelty. The third was not a strike. It was a step in close and a shove that altered the geometry so thoroughly that the boy's count fell out of his mouth and shattered on the floor. He recovered, found a number, tried again, and this time caught the brother's vambrace with his blade and made a sound like hope. The next instant, the brother's hilt kissed his teeth, blood windowed, blade at throat. Yield came from everywhere. The boy did, and added a digit only he heard. Sixth, Marion. Her brother was the one with the badly set nose. They regarded each other like 2 women in a market deciding how much to pay for bread neither could afford. First pass, blades met and slid. Second pass, she used the shield like a book to be read out loud to the face. He did not enjoy the literature. He caught the next strike by the meat of her hand and turned, gentle as a good teacher, and the floor introduced itself to her spine. Breath went elsewhere. She tried to roll and he put 1 boot weight to keep her from learning the wrong thing in the wrong order. The blade waited. She learned the right thing. Yield. The word came small but clean. One aspirant died in this round not by blade but by heart. The reed-boned catechist, called back to face a brother for a second measure, collapsed on her second step, eyes wide as windows in a fire. She was carried out under a sheet with a black ink legend, stating simply that absence had occurred where presence had been attempted. The gallery bowed heads. Lisa stared at the hem of the cloth until the letters blurred, and then remembered to breathe. When it was over, the recruits were fewer, and the ones that remained had learned how narrow the world is when it is measured by a man in armor with a weapon he understands. Melchizedek descended the dais slowly. Crozius lowered to a neutral angle. He walked among them as if picking out timbers at a yard. He spoke without ceremony. You have seen the scale. Some of you found a notch upon it. None of you cross it today. This is right. The last two words fell like a lid settling. Seraphil's voice came like metal slid across stone. Stand. He did not mean legs. They did it anyway, shaking, blood dirty, glad for the instruction even if they could not explain why. Varadiel closed his eyes, and the recruits felt, each in the private grammar of their own minds, the sense of a net slackening. Whatever had been holding them at the skull's hinge let go. Relief moved through the ring so quietly it was almost shame. Servitors trundled in with water in iron cups and bread that had no right to taste as good as it did under this air. Some recruits wept because salt water had been delivered both to the throat and to the eyes at once, and the body likes a theme. The gong at last did not ring. It let the silence lift, aftermath and marking. The ring of weighed and measured still held the heat of footwork and anger. Deckhands in grey with rakes and pails began to convince the floor back toward cleanliness. Lisa's rag made long, practical arcs. She avoided looking at faces. Faces were the part that didn't clean. Melchizedek's Crozius touched a bowl of ash and oil again. He went to each survivor left standing and drew a vertical line from hairline to brow, bone white on sweat and blood. The mark sat there like a truth the skin had been waiting for. Subtracted, he said to the first. Subtracted to the second. It wasn't a promise. It was an accounting entry. He came to Marian last. The ash left a cold track. She fought an urge to flinch, as if the finger were a blade. Subtracted, the chaplain said again, softer. Then, after a heartbeat, an addition. Useful. The collar boy lifted his chin when the ash came, and managed not to glance at the iron ring already branding him as conditional. The calm-eyed girl did not move at all, which is not nothing. Commander Seraphil did not descend. He stood with the stillness of men who have learned that motion too often reads as hope. The oath of bone awaits those who persist, he said. Until then, you will sleep. When you wake, subtraction continues. The galleries let out a breath that tried not to be a sound and succeeded. Children were hoisted. Scribes remembered tools. The banners did not move but looked pleased with their lack of motion. Lisa finished a long stroke of the rag and watched her own hand for a moment, as if it had told a joke behind her back. A boy with wet eyes and a blood-shiny tooth stared at her as if she could interpret what had just happened. She shook her head once, small, and returned to making straight lines. Witnessing is not a gift if you cannot clean afterwards. Varadiel plucked the banner from the stone and shouldered the cloth. The fatigue in the motion made a small sound only he heard. A watcher moved to stand at his knee, as if an old agreement had just been honored in passing. He did not look down. He did not need to. Melchizedek turned away, Crozius at rest, and the sensor servitors followed like small weather systems, sucking the scent of blood out of the air and replacing it with the chemical hope of sterilization. Behind the dais, the doors to the private halls unsealed. and breathed a cooler draught. Whatever would be decided about Xaphonis's empty place would be decided where stone had a better memory and fewer eyes. The recruits were gathered, counted without being counted, and led from the ring. Their footsteps told the floor the same stories. Footsteps always tell in the wake of ritual. Some bragged, some apologized. Some tried to be quiet and failed. Some learned for the first time that walking in a straight line can be a prayer. As the last of them crossed the threshold, the shields around the arena thrummed. Once in a bass note, the galleries felt in the meat of their teeth. Lights along the ribs of the chamber dimmed a fraction. The wrath shifted weight, like a sleeper turning over because the dream has changed rooms. Far below in the ship's dark belly, in a hall no mortal would ever see, bells of a different metal began to answer one another with low notes spaced far apart. A private ceremony was being arranged in chambers lined with bones and names. Dominiel would stand at a rail worn smooth by hands without fear and choose a veteran among veterans. A blade would be turned until it found the hand that had already been waiting for it. An oath would be spoken that mentioned bone and silence and the precise things that knights are permitted to refuse. None of that belonged to the arena. The arena held only what mortals could be allowed, the knowledge that subtraction had shape and could therefore be followed, that hunger could be organized, that pain could be made into a language here, and might, in time, be learned to fluency. Back in the galleries, people stood very still for a long time because the body sometimes needs to believe it is stone to go on. When at last they filed out, they did so with care, as if jostling would peel something loose from the air that ought to remain adherent. The marble ring cooled, letters kept their shadows. In the drip channels at the edge of the floor, a thin pink traveled towards grates with the sober intelligence of water. The ship, satisfied with the account so far, made a tiny sound in her bones like a book closing. It is difficult to distinguish satisfaction from appetite in a machine this old, and perhaps it does not matter. There would be more subtraction tomorrow. This has been Wrath of Angels, Chapter 7, Scene 5. The Tournament. Interlude. The induction of a knight follows. Wrath of Angels. Interlude. The induction of a knight. Aboard the Wrath of Angels, inner circle halls and relic vaults, parallel to the tournament. Month 10, year 263, the 41st millennium. The doors to the public arena closed like lips deciding to keep a secret. Far below, where the Wrath stored her oldest lights and her hungriest shadows, the inner circle halls unsealed with the quiet of a knife sliding out of cloth. No mortal feet had polished these stones. The flagstones were older than the banners that hung over them. The banners were older than several wars that no longer had names. Light here came from braziers that burned without smoke, and from lumen filaments banked as if the room were made for listening. The bones of saints and sinners were set into the walls, not to terrify but to count. Each name was a rung, each rung led down. Dominiel stood on the upper step of the stair grotto, gauntlet resting on the haft of his flail. The head of the weapon hung like a moon with craters. Scripture threaded the links. His helm was off, face bared and unhandsome in the honest way of men who have not had time for beauty. A scar crossed his upper lip and made one corner of the mouth reluctant to agree with the other. He had the statue stillness of a man who stands watch in his sleep. Varadil waited in the shadow of a pillar, banner grounded, eyes a tired light. Melchizedek stood opposite, Crozius held low, hood drawn, the skull of his helm like an argument that had won long ago. Between them, a dais held 3 pedestals, the center for the commander, the right for the word, the left for the sight. A side door admitted Seraphiel. His cloak licked the steps with the weight of its own memory. He came without escort, as if escort would have constituted a claim. The bone-white gauntlet flexed once, quietly. He mounted the dais and placed his fist upon the central pedestal. The stone recognized the pressure. Tiny runes along the base woke like old dogs, sniffed the air, found the scent of command, and lay their heads down again in approval. "Begin," he said. Dominiel inclined his head, a movement precise as a signature. He gestured. A second door, no seam in it apparent until it chose to be known, opened upon a small antechamber. A veteran stepped out. He wore grinning colors dulled by hard use. Marks had been cut into his greaves by teeth and shrapnel, and men with better luck at dice. His face was the kind carved by long storms, planes drawn clean by wind, eyelids that knew how to keep grit out and let vision in. A scar ran from ear to collarbone in a hooked line, the kind of scar that insists on being an exclamation mark in the sentences of other men. He knelt. Not a bow, not a fall, a deliberate placing of weight into stone. "Brother Aster," he said, voice calm through Helmvox. "Third Company, Sanctum Cohort, 9 campaigns since Belvath." He did not list his medals. The room would record what mattered. Melchizedek asked nothing of his past. "Stand," he said. Aster stood. The watchers moved at the edges of the room, like errors in an old scribe's margin, small hoods turning a fraction, and then forgetting to turn back. Dominiel descended and walked a circle around the veteran, as one might around a tree in a storm, reading grain and lean. He spoke without flourish. "At Kithris, you held a breach alone for 37 breaths, while the breach team reset charges. At Belvath, you drew fire from the reliquary steps and fed it into your shield until the barrel gasped. On Ula Fi, you went back for a watcher. Astor did not defend or deflect." "Yes, brother." Dominiel stopped in front of him. "And on Pandemon you killed a thing that had borrowed the voices of children." Astor's throat moved in a small swallow that the armor could not wholly hide. "Yes." Dominiel looked into the space between the man's eyes as if there were an open book there. "When you killed it, did you believe it was already a lie?" "Yes," Astor said. "And then, because honesty is an axe that works better for being sharp. And afterward I believed less, but I kept my hand moving until movement was not needed." Melchizedek's Crozius lifted a finger width. Varadiel's gaze dimmed and brightened, as if some inner weather had shifted from rain to cold sun. Seraphiel did not look at the veteran at all. He watched Dominiel. "Is this the one?" Dominiel did not look away. "He is not the loudest. He is not the prettiest. He is the one that keeps moving when thought is a luxury and faith is a math problem. He will not embarrass the dead." Seraphiel's gauntlet tapped the pedestal once, a sound like agreement dropping onto a ledger. "Name him to our number." Dominiel drew a small blade from a sheath at his belt, a monk's knife, simple, with a notch near the hilt, where thumb finds purchase for work not quite holy. He touched the point to his own palm, drew blood without wincing, then let the drop fall to the stone between them. "Astor, son of no record and brother of many, by deed and by subtraction, I name you to the oath-bound. Stand and be stripped." The watchers brought forward a basin with water that had never known daylight. Steam crawled off it like a thought. Dominiel took a cloth and wiped at the veteran's pauldrons, the green dulling further under wet. He removed the company token, placed it on a tray where other tokens lay with the quiet fraternity of things dismissed with honor. The serfs would never see this tray. The tray would never be stolen. The tray would be folded into the ship's memory like a page pressed flat. Varadiel stepped forward. He did not touch Astor's helm. He touched the air around it. "Unhood," he said, and Astor obeyed. Helm maglocks hissed. Face rose from the skull like a confession. Varadiel's eyes warmed by a fraction, the way winter air warms when the door to a kitchen opens, in a house that has not been happy for a while. "Look at me," he said. Astor did. A pressure stroked across his thoughts, gentle as a physician's fingers on the belly of a fevered child, ruthless as any good diagnosis. "He will not break from knowing," Varadiel said, and stepped back into his pillar's shade. Dominiel gestured again. Doors at the far end of the hall groaned, and the relic vaults beyond rolled their wards like old shoulders. The smell of sanctified oil came through, thick as an old man's aftershave. Beneath it lay iron, leather, the sear dust of vellum. The vaults were a long nave. Racks along the walls held armor segments in the bone white of the Deathwing, each piece asleep, each piece laden with script. Some plates still held the impression of the brother whose mountings they had paired with for a century. One had a sword cut across the pectoral that a master artificer had decided not to erase because stories sometimes must remain visible to keep telling themselves. Between the racks, stands displayed relic blades, calibanite iron that remembered trees that hunted, edges quenched in ways no one would now admit to having understood. There were maces with faces carved into them, axes with hafts wrapped in grey ribbon that had once girded a statue and now supported war. Somewhere near the back, unseen, lay items wrapped in lead. No one reached for those without an instruction. Dominiel led Astor past the rows and into the hollow where the cenobium plate waited upon a stand that had held a dozen lives. He lifted the gorget first. Script ran around its ring like a tight-lipped prayer. He held it while a watcher at his elbow whispered something soft as dust. Astor bent his head. The gorget settled with a sound that was not a click and not a sigh, a metal acceptance. Pauldrons came next, left, then right. Order matters in this house, each seated with careful hands. Dominiel's flail hung at his side like a tired star as he worked. The work was not beneath him. Breastplate, backplate, the cingulum links, each inscribed, each a small weight with its own history. Greaves and sabatons, tassets and folds, each connection sealed with an iron prayer. A watcher held a pot of ash mixed with oil and traced small circles at each junction. The circles were not symmetrical. That was the point. Heaven's geometry was never for straight edges. When the plate was complete, the bone color made of Astor a new geometry. Angles larger than they had been. Weight redistributed into a shape that moved like a statement rather than a question. His Grenwing harness lay folded behind him on the rack like a skin shed correctly. "Arm him," Seraphiel said. Dominiel turned to the blades. He did not direct the veteran's hand. He stood aside, eyes level, and let memory act. Astor ignored the ornate. He walked past a sword with jewels set into the guard that had made lesser men's hearts call them pretty. He reached instead for a calibanite warblade, whose edge had been stoned thin and kept that way by someone who clearly hated waste. The grip was wrapped in cracked leather that still carried a ghost of resin. When his palm closed upon it, his shoulders lowered by a fraction, the way a man's do when he discovers the weight he has lifted is exactly the weight the body wanted. Dominiel nodded once. "Name it," he said, "because names are leashes on the future." Astor considered and did not rush. "Grief," he said. The word landed somewhere no one looked and stayed. Melchizedek's helm inclined by 1 degree. A watcher brought forward a small reliquary box. Dominiel opened it. Inside lay 4 chain seals of dark iron, and a scroll of vellum rolled so tight the fibers creaked in protest. He took one seal, pressed it to the rim of Astor's pauldron until the iron kissed the plate and clung. "Seal of silence," he said. A second to the breast. Seal of bone. A third to the sword's pommel, a snake biting its own tail. Seal of return. The fourth he held and did not yet apply. "Before the last seal," Melchizedek said, voice a measured conflagration. "The oath!" They formed a triangle with Aster at its center. Seraphiel's bone fist rested upon the pedestal behind him. Varadiel's banner cloth swayed in a wind that did not move air. Melchizedek lifted the crozius, so the wings framed Aster's face. "Repeat," he said, and spoke words that were older than their current arrangement, words that had passed through men's mouths until they had worn smooth and sharp at once. "I am subtracted," Aster said. "I am emptied. I am bone under armor and silence under command. I bear the sins that fed me and deny the lies that hunger for me. I take the blade and the shield. I refuse fire that cheats the distance. My arm is the law. My oath is the lock." Melchizedek's head inclined. "Say the taboo." Aster's throat worked. "I will not bear the wrist fire of plasma," he said, naming the thing without the tenderness of its nickname. "Not in council, not in duel, not in breach. I will not raise it to make up what my courage lacks, nor sheath it to court praise. Knights do not burn what they can judge." The last sentence had been made by someone centuries dead and still had teeth. Dominiel offered the fourth seal. Aster took it and pressed it to the inner edge of his own wrist guard. The iron clung, the oath deepened. For a moment the plate felt heavier and the arm beneath it felt lighter. It is difficult to describe the mechanics of vows to those who do not talk their lives tight on purpose. Varadiel stepped forward and set 2 fingers, bare, unarmored, very lightly to the veteran's brow. A pressure moved through Aster's mind like a hand pressing seams flat. The librarian's eyes dimmed. "He will hold," he said, and it was not flattery. Seraphiel's gauntlet rose and closed in the air, not on a throat, on a future. "Then stand, brother Aster of the Oathbound," he said. It was the first time someone had called him that name in public or private. Names change weight depending on room and company. This one landed like armor. A watcher padded forward with a bowl of ash. Melchizedek dipped 2 fingers and drew a small line at the edge of Aster's jaw, almost under the ear, where a man feels his pulse when he doubts he has one. The mark was small. It would be hidden beneath a gorget. That was the point. Rights are for the thing, and for the one who carries it, not for witnesses. Dominiel hooked a chain from his own belt and hung it beside Aster's seal lines. It bore nothing but a small iron ring with 3 notches filed into it. "Zephanis," he said, naming the one whose weight had been redistributed today. "You stand where he fell forward." The chain was not a keepsake. It was a line. Pull here to remember why. Aster slid grief into the scabbard a watcher offered, the leather whispering approval. The plate adjusted itself around him one last time, with tiny sounds like nails seating properly. Seraphiel stepped down from the pedestal. For a heartbeat, the 4 of them, commander, chaplain, librarian, and the newly named, stood at level in a room where level rarely existed. Seraphiel extended the bone-white fist. It was not a handshake. It was a stone laid in a wall. Aster touched it with his gauntlet. The contact carried more charge than any plasma coil he would never wear. "Go," Seraphiel said. "Find your squad. Dominiel will give you your corner of the world to hold." Dominiel turned. The flail's chain kissed his thigh. He looked at Aster the way men look at weather, gauging what to plant and what to bring in. "We carry weight," he said. "We do not perform. We do not explain. Keep moving when thinking runs short." Aster nodded. There are men who talk to fill rooms and men who leave rooms intact. He was of the second kind. He bowed to Melchizedek, who accepted it without blessing, to Varadiel, who returned it with the smallest tilt of head, to Seraphiel, whose stillness swallowed bows and returned something weightier than permission. The watchers opened a door that had not existed a moment ago. The corridor beyond ran on into a thinner light, and the sound of armor being set to rights by people who knew its moods. Astor went. His footfalls knew how to be quiet without apologizing. When he was gone, the hall breathed differently. The braziers altered their tongues. Varadiel exhaled long, as if he had been holding a stone within his chest and had just set it down. Malchadek turned the crozius a fraction in his hand, reading the light off the wings. Seraphiel looked toward the vaults, and then beyond them, through bulkheads and decks, toward a star map only he was currently allowed to see. One place filled, he said, many to empty. Even his grimness had a kind of care in it. Dominiel wiped his palm on a cloth, without looking at the blood he had drawn from himself to name a brother. He hooked the cloth back on his belt. "He will do," he said, which in his mouth was praise. A bell chimed deep in the Wrath's long body, one note perfectly spaced, the kind of sound that makes stone feel handsome. Somewhere above, banners in the arena that had held mortals' eyes twitched without wind and settled as if remembering something older than spectacle. The doors closed behind the triad, with the silence of teeth coming together. The inner circle halls forgot footsteps with professional aplomb. Names in the walls did their slow work. The ship filed the oath where she kept the weather, the debts, and the maps to places no one had any business going. The Wrath was satisfied, which looks like hunger when you do not know her face. This has been Wrath of Angels, Interlude, the Induction of a Knight. Chapter 7, Scene 6 follows. Wrath of Angels. Chapter 7, Scene 6. The Oath of Bone. Aboard the Wrath of Angels. Hall of Bones. 1 month after the tournament. Month 11, year 263. The 41st millennium. They marched without chains for the first time since the Shrine World, and the lack of iron on their wrists felt indecent, like walking into a chapel bareheaded. Deckhands set the pace with staves on steel. Tap, 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 an old rhythm the Wrath remembered. The surviving recruits filed through arteries of the ship that had never tasted battlefield smoke, only the slow incense of memory. Scripture ran along the ribs in brass, short, unsentimental lines cut by hands that had believed in chisels. Make subtraction a habit. Truth is what remains. Honor is a ledger, not a hymn. The corridor bent into a cloister where the bulkheads had been skinned with bone. Not decoration, record. Femurs scrimshawed with names, ribs banded into arches, skulls set into the cornice so that empty eyes looked down like lamps that had once burned and now stored their light in the white. Between the ossuaries hung standards whose cloth had more stitches than silence. One banner showed a winged sword half-sheathed. Someone had threaded a single bone-colored line through the blade, a promise waiting to be cashed. Mortals lined the way. Serfs in ash-stiff robes bowed, or didn't. The brave looked, and then remembered not to. Scribes held tablets flat against their chests, knowing the oaths to come were not to be written by their hands. Children were present because a ship is a city, and cities cannot always keep the young from thresholds. They watched with the veracity of famine, learning shapes they would never speak aloud. Watchers in silence walked ahead like punctuation. They did not set the pace. The pace made itself around them. Where they paused, the recruits paused. Where they turned, the corridor chose to become a different corridor. In their wake, censer servitors rolled and exhaled a smoke that smelled of lemon metal, wax, old vellum, and the moment before a storm. Marion walked with her jaw set, ribbon already burned in the pit, hair unadorned and plain. The calm-eyed girl kept her hands loose at her sides, knuckles pale. a habit she had learned to keep her body from shaking when men with knives called her by number. The boy with the column spine counted under his breath so softly it could have been a prayer or a tick. The collar boy had been released from his iron ring for this procession, the ligature removed by a mechadendrite that had whispered acceptance as it withdrew. The skin at his throat bore a faint circle like a memory of a hand. Lisa walked the flank with the deckhands, half surf, half shadow, bucket and brush, traded for an oil jar and a bundle of narrow, stiff-bristled brushes. She had cleaned floors for this rite before. Today, she would paint. They came to the hall. It lay at the Wrath's exact heart, where sound becomes a different animal. The doors were bone, not carved to look like bone, but bone, laminated and seamed with iron, each plate a long remnant from a time when the chapter's dead had been returned by ship rather than by ash. The hinges carried their own litany. When they opened, the note ran up the spine and into the teeth. Inside the Hall of Bones was a long nave cut by transepts, bones on the walls. Yes, but beyond that, reliquary screens pierced with calibanite knotwork, iron choir stalls with seats worn by a weight heavier than mortals, pulpits with vox horns mouth trimmed in scripture. The floor was dark, veined stone sealed until it reflected. At the far end, on a dais reached by 9 shallow steps, a rectangular altar sat beneath a canopy of spears. Across the altar lay a relic of the winged sword, half buried in ash. The blade's fuller drank light. The ash lay still. The command triad occupied their places like the points of a geometry a city might be built from. Chaplain Malkadek stood to the right with the Crozius grounded, one hand on the hammer's neck. His hood made a narrow gable over the skull helm. He did not move save to breathe, and even that occurred only with the permission of the room. Commander Seraphiel stood at center, bone-white armor striated with scars that had not been polished out, because some stories deserved to remain legible. His power fist rested on the altar edge, very gently, as if afraid to wake something that should not be woken. Burgundy cloak fell in a weight that made a sound like heavy pages turning when he shifted. Varadil stood at the left with banner planted, eyes aglow as if fatigue were fuel. The staff's ferrule had sunk a hair into the stone over years of this service. The groove accepted it now with the familiarity of ritual. Watchers arrayed themselves along the lowest step like small tombs that had learned to stand. A choir of serfs in plain robes lined the side aisles, hands on black hymnals bound in iron. They did not sing yet. The room's first music belonged to the engines deep below, a held note somewhere between blood and weather. "Forward," Melchizedek said, and the word did not echo. It unfolded. The recruits climbed the 9 shallow steps. They knelt in 3 rows on the dais's wide apron, knees to the dark stone, heads bowed. Lisa and the other deckhands moved behind them with jars and brushes. The oil in the jars was pale and smelled faintly of almonds and dust. A powder of bone-white ash floated in it like winter. Melchizedek lifted the Crozius. The choir drew breath, and the rite began. "Who comes to be subtracted?" he asked. "We do," the recruits answered, the sound uneven and then together. Their voices, poured into the hall, came back different, stripped of the tremors of individual throats, left with only the grain of truth. "Whom do you leave at the door?" "Self," they said. Some said it like a word. One said it like a confession that tasted of salt. "What remains?" "Duty," they said. "Bone, silence." "Whom do you serve?" "The lion, the book, the wrath," they answered, not in that order by accident. Varadil raised his hand slightly, and the atmosphere tightened, as if the ship had closed a hatch somewhere. "Do not let go," came the pressure. Not words, but the memory of words. Do not let go while the net is cast. Malcadek's Crozius tapped the altar once, and the choir found the note it had been carrying secretly in their chests. They sang, low, pale harmonies, syllables shaped to fit the metal of the room. The words were old, and what age had not rubbed smooth, steel had sharpened. Subtraho, 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 subtract, subtract, subtract. The melody moved like a barge carrying a weight it did not name. Lisa dipped her brush into the jar and lifted it out dripping with milk white. She set the bristles to Marian's left pauldron, a single stroke, clean and decisive, the width of a finger, running from rim to rim like a bridge. When she lifted the brush, a thread of pale hung and snapped. The mark gleamed wetly, then dulled to a bone mat that seemed to drink the light of the stained glass and give back nothing but intention. She moved on, calm-eyed girl, collar boy, boy with the column spine. One stroke each, the same angle, the same pressure, the same small, solemn care. The stripe did not make them Deathwing. It made them spoken for. Malcadek intoned the first litany. Subtract the name given by fear. The recruits repeated, subtract the name given by fear. Subtract the story you prefer. Subtract the story you prefer. Subtract the self that hinders obedience. They spoke it, and some felt something leave. It did not go far. It sat down in the back of the skull and waited. But naming subtraction is the first subtraction. A watcher mounted the steps, carrying a book on both hands. The book was bound in hide no one would identify with confidence, with iron bosses and a bar lock. It was called the Book of Failures, though its pages were blank. That was the point. It had room left. Malcadek touched the lock. It opened with a sigh like a forgiven sin. The watcher presented the book to the kneeling recruits. They did not look at it directly. You do not meet the eye of your own absence. Varadil opened his other hand and pressed the air down. The net cinched. The recruits' minds touched one another, not intimately, but undeniably. A moment of shared silence is not the same as a moment of shared speech. The collar boy felt the column spine boy's counting braid with his own heartbeat, and become, for a breath, a metronome he could trust. Marian tasted the calm-eyed girl's careful stillness and recognized it as courage of a different grammar. The farm girl felt a cold sparking at the base of the skull that she had mistaken for fear the first time and now understood as gate pressure. One aspirant, thin, reed-boned, the catechist who had nearly died of heart earlier in the arena, began to rock where he knelt. The chain of mines shivered where it touched him. His breath went narrow and shrill. Hold, Varadil murmured into the net, and many held for him, willingly, because sometimes obedience looks like kindness, and sometimes kindness is the strictest obedience possible. He steadied. The net slackened by a hair. Malcadek lifted the Crozius until the winged head framed his helm. Speak the oath, he said, and spoke the first line, and they followed. I am subtracted, they said. I am emptied. I am bone under armor, silence under command. I bear wrath and receive judgment. I keep the book and deny the lie. I will name nothing sacred that steals from duty. I will tell no truth to those who have not earned its weight. I will be the hinge by which doors are opened and closed. My arm is law in the absence of law. My law is the order. My breath is counted by the ship. My blood is accounted to the legion. If I am lost, let the sea name me and the ship spend me. If I am found, let it be at the door to where I am needed. Subtract the self, add the bone. When they came to the final chorus, the choir stepped on the note and turned it, gorgeously, like a knife twisting into a lock. The hall changed temperature. Ash lifted from the altar and settled again without moving through air. A boy 2 rows back began to scream. It was not loud, it was continuous, and that made it worse. His hands fumbled for his own throat, nails drawing thin red lines. A watcher moved a fraction. Melchizedek did not look. He did not have to. A bolt pistol spoke once, well behind the words, as if punctuation were a separate sentence. The body folded where it knelt. 2 serfs came with a cloth and carried it away by the corners, the way you carry something that will leak if you are unkind. No one broke the net. That was the test. Varadil's arm trembled the way a column trembles when the earth misremembers how to hold still. He lowered his hand. The pressure lifted like a tide going out. Minds separated with small, private gasps. The air around the altar smelled of metal, shaved very thin. The book of failures shut itself gently, and the lock slid home. Lisa worked her way down the lines, brush whispering on plate and leather where plate would be one day. She did not paint those who had died earlier. Their absence was already the paler mark. She paused over the boy with the column spine because his pauldron bore a hairline crack any other eye might have missed. She set the brush so the ash oil settled into it like a salve. He did not look up, but the small muscles along his jaw unclenched. She moved on. Now Melchizedek took a different tool from a serf's tray, a stylus of bone with an iron nib. He dipped it into a small pot by the altar, ink blacker than the space between engines, and wrote a short mark on the inner wrist of each kneeling recruit, just under where a gauntlet seal would sit when the day came. Not a word, not a letter, a small knot. Every knot was a little different. Heaven's geometry does not mass produce. When he came to Marian, he lifted her hand with a care that made the bones believe they might be worth saving. The nib scraped, tiny, precise pain, and then a cool, as if someone had poured certainty over the new mark. You will be useful where it hurts, he said, not as curse or praise, merely forecast. To the calm-eyed girl, he said nothing. When he wrote, the line sat on her skin like a line on stone, sure of itself. To the collar boy, he wrote a knot that touched his pulse and felt to him like a lock clicking without doors. To the farm girl, he wrote deeper, knowing that scars on calloused skin must be said louder. To the wiry boy, he made the knot small, as if to prove you could say important things without shouting. Then Seraphil spoke, and the hall tilted toward him because authority changed gravity. Rise, he said. They rose, 3 rows up in a single breath. Knees complained, spines found their height again. The bone-white brushstrokes on their left pauldrons caught a new light that no scribe could find the source of later. By ordeal of flesh, by trial of faith, by judgment of knife, by test of arms, Seraphil said, each clause falling like a stone placed carefully. You are entered into the roles of the dark angels. You will wear green where you once wore grief. You will learn silence where you once learned speech. You will fight where you are told, and hold where you are not told to move. Your names will be said in a room you will never walk into. That is honor. A serf rang a small bell that had forgotten how to be loud. The choir answered with a chord that reminded men how to stand. Scribes came forward, not the ones in the galleries, different ones with ink on the palms and quiet on the faces. They carried a great roll of vellum on a gilt axle and set it upon a stand. The roll already bore names cramped in a disciplined hand. A scribe dipped his pen. Seraphil spoke a name. The pen wrote it. Another name, another stroke. The sound of nib on skin of calf, parchment once alive, was unexpectedly moving. Marian of no house, Seraphil said. The pen wrote, Marianne. No father, no mother, no shrine. The chapter would be the parentage now. Gavril is dead. Melchizedek said plainly when his turn came. The pen did not write. That too is a kind of inscription. Seth of the Foundry Shift. Ansel. Thera. Joth. Leo. No, Leon. Names were said properly, even when they were poor. There is honor in accuracy. When he reached the boy with the column spine, Seraphil paused a fraction of a heartbeat longer than would be noticed by someone who had not been alive for centuries. Tavian, he said, tasting the syllables, making them shape themselves to the chapter. The pen wrote, Tavian. The knot on the wrist warmed as if pleased to discover it could have a name without becoming only a name. When the last name had been recorded and sanded, yes, they used sand, a pan of it held by a child serf, with wrists like reeds. The scribes bowed and backed away. The roll was turned half a degree, and the ink flashed once, and then settled to a black as final as a door closing. Melchizedek turned the crozius across his chest, the wings shadowing his helm. The oath you bear tonight is weight enough for your years. Yet remember, some oaths weigh heavier than others. Should you be called, you will carry them in silence, and in that silence you will be known. Serfs advanced with trays. On each tray lay a gorget plate newly lacquered in Caliban green, a plain tabard of cream, a leather-bound book small enough to live in a pouch against the ribs. The initiates were girded, not armed, not yet, but clothed in a grammar. Lisa's brushwork had dried to a soft bone that looked like chalk laid down very carefully. Wear the color as a statement, not an advertisement, Melchizedek said. Do not make your tabard say what your conduct can say better. Read the book until the words wear smooth, and then keep reading. Varadil raised his banner, and from it fell a thin shadow that crossed the altar, the recruits, the watchers, and came to rest at the foot of the ossuary wall. In that shadow, the bone looked less like death and more like structure. The choir sang the closing measure, which had no words. The hall doesn't need words for endings. It needs space for beginnings to move into. The doors at the far end unsealed. Cool air came in smelling of oil and the deep, efficient quiet of armories. Deckhands signaled. The initiates turned, not by command, but by instruction, grown into bone, and filed out. Their footfalls were heavier, not because of gear, but because oaths have mass and had been attached to them at the joints. As they passed the mortals in the corridor again, a murmur went through the ranks and then collapsed. No one reached out to touch a tabard. The superstition against laying a hand on the newly sworn was older than the ship. The children stared, and one lifted a wooden sword in an unconvincing salute. Marian's mouth almost smiled. Almost. Lisa brought up the rear with empty jars and bristles splayed and stiff. She'd painted 100 brushstrokes in her years, and each dried to the same matte oath. She would dream tonight of lines in bone white, and wake with the taste of almonds and iron on her tongue, and an ache at the base of the skull that felt like someone else's vow left on the table after a meal. Behind them, in the hall, Melchizedek extinguished the braziers one by one, with a cone of iron that fit their mouths perfectly. Varadiel lifted the banner and felt the small relief a man feels when a weight he is permitted to carry is not the heaviest in the room. Seraphil pressed 3 fingers of his flesh hand to the relic blades fuller and then lifted them clean. No ash clung. A watcher closed the book of failures and turned so its blank pages faced the wall, as if to say, we will not tempt them by being easy to find. Number? Seraphil asked without turning. Fewer, Melchizedek said, which is the only right answer when you have done subtraction correctly. Enough, Varadil murmured, and did not mean quantity. They stood in the triangle of command for a heartbeat longer, as if their bodies remembered the parts of a circle only when the other bodies were present. Then they left by doors that only ever opened inward. The initiates reached the armories where racks waited with the first pieces of their future. Simple greens, plain helms, knives none of them deserved yet and would learn to deserve. A veteran sergeant with a voice like gravel being persuaded to be useful assigned them cots and numbers and silences. In a corner, a servitor applied small white numerals to green plate with a hand that did not tremble. It hummed a nursery song none of them had heard since before they had been born. Marion sat on the edge of a cot and traced the bone stripe on her pauldron with a fingertip, not touching, just hovering, as if heat still lived there. The calm-eyed girl lay back and stared at the ceiling as if it were a puzzle she had consented to let remain unsolved for 5 breaths. Tavian, he tried the name silently and it held, counted to 9 and did not know why that satisfied him, only that it did. The collar boy touched the new knot on his wrist until the skin grew warm beneath his finger, and then put his hand down because pride is made of obeying limits as much as crossing them. The wrath shifted her weight, and the deck murmured. Somewhere far aft, a chime sounded, the sort of sound that means a map has been updated. In chambers the initiates would not enter. The inner circle set about a different kind of geometry. In a corridor the serfs would always use and never name. Lisa washed her brushes in a basin of spirits that turned milk white to ghost water, and then to nothing. She poured it down a drain that led to the same place all vows go, back into the ship. At the end of the watch, Melchizedek walked the empty hall of bones alone. He touched one femur here, one skull there, not as man counting, as man being counted. He stopped at a name he had no right to love, and did not love, and still could not help the small pause. This is how bones work, magnifying pauses into litany. "We have added enough for tonight," he told the wall, which did not answer because the wall was busy with memory. He turned out the last lamp. Darkness did not swallow the hall. The hall simply remembered how to be itself without light. The oaths stood where they had been spoken. Oaths do not need to be watched to keep working. Outside, the wrath set her prow a fraction tighter toward the coordinates Seraphiel had shown the triad hours ago in a different shadowed room. The ship had more subtraction ahead of her. She was content. Contentment in machines this old looks like hunger, and perhaps that is theology, or perhaps it is engineering. In their cots, the brand new dark angels did not sleep easily, but their dreams, thin, hard things, carried a small weight now, and weight steadies. In the morning, subtraction would begin again, and they would bring their bones to it like offerings. This has been Wrath of Angels, Chapter 7, Scene 6, The Oath of Bone. Chapter 7, Scene 7 follows. Wrath of Angels. Chapter 7, Scene 7, The War Council. Aboard the Wrath of Angels. Strategium in Command Dais. 1 year and 5 months after extraction from Caridon. Month 12, year 263. The 41st millennium. The Strategium lay in the Wrath's skull, behind the eyes, above the teeth, where judgement lives. Doors of black brass parted on counterweights and old authority, sighing apart to spill a wash of lamplight, the color of antique bone. Within, the chamber rose like a furnace built for thought. Walls of dark metal chased with low-relief campaigns, their victories picked out in auric lines that refused to gleam all at once. The engravings were arranged as a broken wreath, each panel unfinished at one edge, so that triumph could never lie to itself and declare a circle closed. At the center hung the world sphere, a crystal globe 3 spans wide, hooped with astrolabe rings and latticed with fine, motile filaments. Stars burned inside it like dust caught in wine. From time to time, a filament pulsed and a path lit, then guttered, shy as a fish. Beneath, an altar table of gunmetal iron stood on 6 concentric steps, its surface scored by the claws of maps past. The steps formed a shallow theatre. Men could stand upon them and see one another's faces if they had the courage to look. Watchers in silence entered first. They padded from shadow to shadow and took up their stations around the perimeter, staves grounded not on the brass but just shy of it, ends hovering as if the floor were too sacred to be touched by wood. Their presence pulled heat from the air and steadied it, the way a plumb line steadies a mason's hand. Chaplain Melchizedek came with Crozius, shrouded in velvet, its weight bulging against the cloth like a verdict impatient to be spoken. Purity seals trailed from his tabard, papery snakes stirred by no wind. He mounted one step and stopped, helm bowed, vox grill dark, like a man praying that his prayer would arrive after all the others and still be heard. Varadil followed, robe whispering, banner grounded with the certainty of a man who knows exactly how far the ferrule has sunk into this stone over years of councils. The tired light behind his eyes pulsed rather than shone. Exhaustion had learned to be fuel. Last came Commander Seraphil, and the chamber leaned a degree toward him as the wrath rebalanced its mind. Bone-white plate, scar-laced and clean, burgundy cloak heavy as a closed book, the master-crafted fist at his side, a small cathedral of violence that never needed to clench to be understood. He stepped onto the highest step and set the fist upon the pedestal's crown. The globe brightened, constellations woke, threads drew themselves between waypoints with the intimacy of veins filling. Captains filed in, armor dulled by use, tabards marked by wing. A Stormwing commander with a shield whose edge bore the engraved story of claws that had not passed. A Ravenwing captain with void oil in the seams of his boots, fast even at a halt. A Dreadwing sergeant wrapped in a cloak that had learned the taste of radsand. A Firewing officer with a blade polished thin as a thought. Ironwing and guard too, their presence a grammar of weight. Behind the watchers, half in shadow, stood the newly sworn Deathwing, the oathbound, bone-white plate, faceless and still. They were not here to speak. They were the wall the voices would break against if they strayed. Scribes of the chapter, different to the public ones who pantomimed record, sat at narrow benches with wax tablets. Their styluses hovered and then lowered. They knew what could and could not be written. A pair of serfs knelt by the doors, with sensors that leaked lemon metal and old vellum into the lungs. Somewhere in the decks below, the Wrath's engines held a note that made the brass breathe. Seraphil's voice is how iron sounds when it chooses words. Brothers, we convene over a trail that may be bait, may be blessing. He tilted the fist. The world sphere obeyed. Lines crawled into being within the crystal. Faint beads of coordinates, strung like a rosary whose prayers had been scattered. The thread began near the sector of their last hunt. Wound through lanes the Mechanicum had bullied into the void, and vanished into a pall of static like ash blown back into the face. These, Seraphil said, were taken from a traitor's mind before the flames finished their sermon. Cross-checked. The beads name a place abandoned since the heresy, Vardath. The name sat in the chamber like a weight let down on a chain until it found stone. Varadil lifted his head, a slow motion, as if separating bone from duty. I have seen Vardath in the warp's reflection. A world frostburnt, its cities wearing Calibanite script like scar tissue. I saw the winged sword sigil cut and recut into stone, as if to say remember and refuse. But the trail is shadowed. When I reach for it, something reaches back. It lies like truth, or tells truth like a lie. I cannot tell which. Malkedek's helm turned, a skull deciding where to bite. Trap or truth require the same answer, he said. A world that harbors the fallen cannot remain a world. We go, we cut, we burn, we salt the absence. The Stormwing commander shifted. The shield on his arm bumped the step, a low chime. My line companies stand at half strength, shields patched, ranks thin. To force a world without weight is to invite our own subtraction. Delay to rebuild the wall, let the enemy discover we can count. The Ravenwing captain's laugh was a dry chip. Delay is a door closing. While you mortar your courage, the fallen widen their lanes. Give me the thread and I will ride it. We will be on Vardath before your second cohort has remembered how to form a square. The Dreadwing sergeant coughed approval and disdain in the same breath. Speed is dust without fire. Dust blows away. We go with annihilation engines, or we go back to write letters of apology to Bones. Ironwing murmured about tonnage and rails. Guardwing rumbled about the uses of silence versus spectacle. The chamber filled with measured voices, the argument rising like tide but never splashing the brass. The watchers absorbed the volume. The air itself developed edges. Varadiel's banner cloth stirred in wind only thought feels. I see a blade whetted on both sides, he said. I see a mouth that speaks truth and devours it. Whether it is snare or scripture, the road will cut us. The question is not whether harm comes. The question is whether harm can be turned into victory. Malkedek's Crozius thumped once, a heartbeat in wood and iron. Every harm is victory if faith names it. Better wounds in the body than rot in the will. We go. The Firewing captain rose with the economy of a man who treats movement like coin. We do not require annihilation nor delay. We require decapitation. Let the Stormwing keep their walls for when there are walls left. Let the Dreadwing polish their sons for when there is a city to erase. Give me Vardath's spine, names, nodes, vox hearts, and I will put bolts through each within one night cycle. When the body has no head, it falls politely. Stormwing shook his head, shield scraping. Kill their captains and their priests grow teeth. Kill their walls and there are no captains left to grow. Ravenwing flashed that shard of a grin again. While you argue, the trail cools. Give me a day, and I'll bring you back its temperature. Give me a week and I'll bring you back its ashes, Dreadwing rasped. The mortals at the walls tried to be smaller than their robes. The smoke from their censers had weight in the mouth, a taste of iron filings and crushed almond that would haunt their dreams. A scribe's hand shook. The stylus made a neat, meaningless line. He erased it, knowing the erasure mattered more than the line. Seraphiel let the words stand in the air long enough to see if they would arrange themselves. They didn't. Words rarely do. He curled his flesh fingers against his palm and felt old scars decide to ache. When he spoke, the chamber remembered what a single sentence can be. If it is truth, he said, then the lion left us a duty written in stone, and we read what is written. If it is snare, we will be the jaws that close on the hand that set it. We do not turn aside. We do not delay. The wrath does not hesitate. The sentence struck like a nail through boards. Heads bowed, not all the way, not the same angle, but gravity had been named. Varadiel inclined, the tired light steady. Malkedek tilted the Crozius a fraction, sermon sheathed. Stormwing raised his shield to shoulder, ascent made into posture. Ravenwing's grin sharpened. Hunger could be a virtue if you fed it the right things. Dreadwing tapped his blade's guard with a knuckle, a private ritual for soon. Firewing pressed lips thin around unshed argument and bent half a degree. The watchers moved their staves by a hair. Something counted down somewhere you could not see. Seraphiel lifted the bone-white fist from the pedestal. The globe dimmed, but did not darken. Vardath's coordinate burned there like an ember. "Prepare the hexagrammaton," he said, and the wrath seemed to draw breath with him. Ravenwing, screens, probes, outriders past the pall. Stormwing, form lines for ground assault. Rebuild ranks as we burn fuel. Dreadwing, prime annihilation engines and lock warheads to my seal. Ironwing, wake the armories and speak kindly to the machines that hate waking. Firewing, catalogue targets we have not yet seen and prepare the precise anger. Guardwing, seal the inner halls. Deathwing stands with me. Varadiel added his thread. I will weave the warp around us, but shadows will take some of that cloth. Expect places where sight will lie, and remember how to believe nothing that bleeds too readily. Melchizedek, if sight lies, the book remains. If the book seems to lie, the Crozius remains. If both fail, then you remain, and you have bones. It will do. The council's shape broke. The decision remained. Captains turned. Armor whispered. Tabards gave up their secrets to motion. Watchers unhooked themselves from the edges of sight and became edges again. On the upper steps, two of the oathbound, Aster among them, stood at ease like statues that had learned to breathe. The decision settled into their plate as weight and instruction. The word Vardath struck the inside of their helms and found places to sit. Outside the doors, unseen, a line of newly sworn Grenwing initiates stood in the antechamber, heads down, tasting the change in the ship without language. The floor trembled in a frequency you feel in teeth. The wrath had set her mind. Children of deck serfs would wake later with the taste of metal and rain in their mouths and not know why. Seraphiel did not dismiss the council and then stand alone. He dismissed it and remained a point in a triangle. Melchizedek stayed at his right, Varadiel at his left. Triads work best when they remember they are not three men, but a single hinge. For a long breath, the three of them looked at the globe the way men look at weather, and name it by taste. Varadiel spoke first, quietly enough that only Bones could hear. When we make the jump, I can keep the ship bound against the first wrench. After that, the cloth frays. There will be doors that open with nothing behind them. There will be doors that don't exist and must be walked through. Then we kick, Seraphiel said, and keep walking. Melchizedek's vox made humor sound like a well-behaved funeral. We will read whatever books are thrown. A watcher moved between them, set the butt of its staff against the pedestal's base, and left it there, as if to say, this is sealed. Set the course, Seraphiel said, and the wrath obeyed at once because she had been waiting for the excuse. The world sphere flared. The bead trail brightened and snapped into a line that felt like a blade at the throat of the void. Astrolabe rings ticked, the small, satisfied noises that precision makes. Brass along the walls warmed. The reliefs of old wars shifted their shadows, as if the scenes had remembered something better and worse. In the galleries, a single bell was struck, not a chime, a single iron syllable. You felt it under the breastbone more than you heard it. Scribes scratched a mark in wax and smoothed it away with a thumb. The act mattered. Records were sometimes a performance for those who must not have records. Orders left the strategium in ripples. On hangar decks, crews unhooded bikes and land speeders that still smelled of the last hunt's heat. In annihilation vaults, coffin-long devices woke and found their own names bitter. In armories, servitors hummed nursery songs to machine spirits as they unlocked rails. In barracks, sergeants took attendance as if counting prayers. In the ship's throat, the warp engines began to purr, and the purr had teeth. Seraphiel removed the bone fist from the pedestal and hung it at his side. The hand that was still flesh went to the relic lacquer of the altar and pressed there 3 fingers wide. He did not speak to the blade embedded in ash. He did not need to. "Council dismissed," he said at last. Not to the room, but to the war, which obeyed with visible relief. They left. Captains, watchers, the faceless Deathwing. The Strategium remembered them by scent and weight and little scratches made by sabaton edges. Melchizedek was last of the 2 to go. Varadiel lingered a moment longer, alone with the globe and what he had not said. He looked up into the crystal and saw a thing that had no right to be seen. A faint counter-thread, running under Vardeth like rot under paint. He did not look away, but neither did he point. Some truths are carried in the hand, not the mouth, or they spill. He lifted the banner and left the room emptier, and therefore stronger. Beyond the Strategium, the wrath turned. The motion was not the sharp swing of a blade, but the long pivot of a cathedral deciding to face another sun. Brass ribs sang, bulkheads creaked with satisfaction and slash or hunger. The distinction in old machines is theological. Banners along gangways lifted in a wind no man had made. In the antechamber, the Grenwing initiates felt the deck shift and tried on steadiness. A veteran sergeant moved among them, assigning silences. "You will not speak in corridors," he instructed. "You will not name the destination. You will file. You will not be late. You will be subtraction given legs." Their bone-white shoulder stripes drank the low light and gave none back. Astor found the Oathbound's muster alcove by memory already his. Dominiel stood there with flail hanging, counting a squad by the angle of their stillness. "We wait the jaw," he said to no one and everyone. "When it closes, it is because we are there." The jump klaxons did not howl. They announced themselves with 3 calm pulses. Somewhere, deep in decks where only servitors walked, a great wheel engaged, and the Wrath's heart went into a different meter. Gathered men felt it in old scars. Children in galleries felt it in milk teeth. The dead in the Hall of Bones felt it not at all, which is its own form of obedience. The world outside the viewports shivered. Stars seemed suddenly to be handwriting. A corridor yawned in the place where sight insisted there had been only distance. The wrath of angels took 1 step, and then another, and then none at all. Because steps are a mortal metaphor, and the ship was older than metaphor. The last thing in the Strategium to move was a thread of incense that had hung undisturbed since the council began. It twisted, elongated, snapped into nothing. The pedestal cooled. The globe ticked softly to itself in the steady talk old instruments make when they are happy to be useful again. If it was truth, they were going to read it. If it was a snare, they were bringing teeth. Either way, the Crucible had chosen more fire. This has been Wrath of Angels. Chapter 7, Scene 7, The War Council. Chapter 8, Scene 1 follows.